Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I want to take a quick second to let you know about chilling. I talk about chilling quite a bit because, well, I'm a part of it, so yeah, I gotta talk about it. Chilling is an app that's currently available on Apple, iTunes, and Android, and basically anywhere you can get your app from. And it's got a whole bunch of horror stories that you're able to listen to, kind of like the stories that you hear here, except it's not just me, even though I am on there. There's stories that are all exclusive just to the Chilling app, as well as stories from a whole bunch of other friends of mine, such as Autumn Ivy, and honestly, like a bunch of Creepypasta narrators. Not to mention, it's also got this really cool system that allows you to use your own background music, choose your own music that is actually from Mew. So the music that you would hear around here, you could be able to set up the ones that you want to be able to hear, the music that you like, or the ambience that you like. And now, since it's their 1-year anniversary, they're doing a giveaway. I know they usually have a giveaway, and I talk about it, but this one's really cool. The Chilling 1-year anniversary giveaway is a Samsung 70-inch Class 7 Series LED 4K UHD smart television. Not joking. It is a 70-inch television that they're giving away. They're giving away a 4.1 channel soundbar, and of course you get a limited edition Year 1 t-shirt from Chilling. So, the only things you need to do to enter are start your free trial of it, so it's free to enter. Head over to chillingapp.com and click on the giveaway. Fill out a little bit of a form, leave your review of the Chilling app, and boom, you could be having a new television and soundbar. I mean, I might enter that. Are you kidding me? I need a new television. But yes, as I was saying, Chilling app. It's wonderful. It's great. Check it out. You like horror? You like chilling. And now, on to tonight's story. That's the last of it, I said, breathing a sigh and collapsing onto the couch. I am officially toast. I just finished hauling the last couple of boxes into the house from the moving truck. Stacks of them were piled throughout the living room, making a corrugated forest around me. Unpacking would be another long adventure, but at least we had finally gotten all our belongings into the farmhouse so that we could begin the process of starting our new life here. As I lay on the couch relaxing momentarily, the hairs began to stand up on the back of my neck. I started to get a strong sense that I was being watched, specifically from the door beneath the stairs leading to the basement. It creaked open slowly, just a crack, as I observed it back. I closed my eyes, ignoring that paranoid feeling. There was no one else in the house except for us. Therefore, nobody was watching me. It was just my imagination. Yet, still, every time I turned away, I felt a tingling, and I saw a vague shadow in that direction, just barely visible in my peripherals. There was also a feeling of a presence that I couldn't ignore. The door to the basement yawned open wider as if inviting me in. Darkness peered out, blacker than a midnight graveyard. Standing up on shaky legs, I began to walk over to that door, thinking a draft from the basement was blowing it open. I didn't like the feeling of it being ajar. Don't ask me why, but I just didn't like it. As I drew closer, the sensation of eyes watching me became even more powerful, as if I was drawing closer to a predator, and my body was telling me to turn away and run. That darkness was too much for me to look at, so I turned my eyes away briefly, but that made the feeling even worse. I couldn't help thinking that if something jumped out of the doorway, I wouldn't see it until it was too late, so I looked back again, forcing myself to focus my attention on the eerie blackness. When I returned my gaze to the doorway, I could have sworn I saw eyes looking at me from the darkness for a brief instant, so quick that it could have passed off as a trick of the light. But it made my heart skip a beat nonetheless. I slammed the door shut so hard it shook the house, and my wife yelled at me to be more gentle with the old place. Heading into the kitchen, my heart was thumping in my chest. I told Christine what had happened. What do you mean you saw eyes down there? There was somebody in the basement? We need to call the cops. I was trying to decide if my overtired brain had imagined it. I thought I'd seen something, but the more I considered it, the less likely it seemed. It could have been my eyes playing tricks on me. I'll grab a flashlight and I'll take a look. No, you can't! It's too dangerous. The place was locked up, right? So it couldn't have been a person down there. It was probably me imagining things, right? But I'll take a look, just to be safe. Are you sure about this? Maybe we should call the police and have them check it out. It'll take them an hour just to get here. We're not in the city anymore, remember? Besides, there's no way anybody could have gotten in here since the owners left. Unless they had a key, so let me take a look. Okay? Christine reluctantly agreed and took out her phone, dialing 911 and getting ready to hit send in case anything happened. I found a flashlight in one of the boxes marked camping and opened the basement door. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I began to descend. Proceeding down the rickety steps, the beam of light showed multitudes of dust motes, particles floating in the air, being kicked up by my movements. Ancient wooden stairs creaked beneath my feet with each step I took, going down and down, deeper beneath the ground. As I did, that feeling returned again. That sensation of something watching me, that unpleasant feeling beginning to grow and blossom into the worst fear I'd ever experienced in my life. As I set my foot down onto the dirt-packed floor of the lower level. The old farmhouse had an ancient relic of a basement, I realized. Since we had moved from a long ways away, we hadn't seen this place in person. This was the first time I had been down there. The owners had chosen not to include pictures of the basement in their ad, and I was beginning to understand why. Shining my light around, I saw there was old pieces of leather and ragged strips of wire, rope, and twine hanging from the ceiling's crossbeams, crude wooden crosses assembled from broken sticks, and small logs hung suspended from these, turning and swaying gently despite the lack of breeze down in the basement. I felt a presence behind me suddenly and spun around, the air turning ice cold. For a moment, I thought I saw a dark-shaped shadow. Similar to a person, but there was no one standing there. Every part of me wanted to get out of there, but I knew I had to make sure the basement was empty. I shone my flashlight in every corner, every hidden spot, making sure it was unoccupied. Sure enough, it was. But I did find something. There was a black box in a stone alcove, surrounded by inscriptions carved directly into the foundations of the house. The strange shrine resembled something from a church or a temple, but it appeared darker somehow. Evil. A chill ran through my bones, which seemed to emanate from the stone. Unlit candles and strange black statues surrounded the box, sitting dead center, the focal piece of this creepy, unholy altar. I don't remember taking the box upstairs with me, but nonetheless, I found myself back on the main level, holding it in my hands. It looked curious and ancient. The feeling of someone watching remained, accompanied by an odd chill, which ran through my bones, almost like the temperature in the house had gone down by 10 degrees. "There's nobody down there," I told Christine, who was waiting for me at the top of the stairs. But I found this weird box and all these crosses were hanging from the ceiling. Very creepy. "You need to get rid of that thing," she said, holding up her hand to cover her eyes from even looking at it. "I hate it. There's something wrong with it." "Really? What do you want me to do with it?" I asked. "It's just some old box, probably someone's keepsakes." "I don't care. Put it outside, send it away with the trash on pickup day, just get rid of it." Christine never acted this way. She didn't believe in superstitions or curses. She was a self-proclaimed atheist, in fact. But the way she was acting was enough to convince me that she was serious, so I didn't argue. Okay, I'll put it outside," I said. I brought it out with me into the front yard and tried to decide where to put it. I settled on leaving it in the back of the moving truck. In the glow of the lights inside the box of the moving van, I took a moment to take a closer look at the box. It was ice cold to the touch, I realized. The surface of it was slick and black, like polished marble. But when I took my hand away, it smudged off like charcoal. There were archaic symbols carved into it, and a lock held it shut at the front. I found myself trying to open it, but was unable to. Distantly, I heard something whispering to me. Its voice insistent and raspy, but I dismissed that as just the wind and nothing more. Eventually, I gave up on the box's lock and went inside. My wife looked startled when I walked in the front door. "What were you doing out there? I thought you'd gone to bed. You were out there with that creepy box for over an hour." "No. I started to disagree with her, but then I looked at my watch and realized she was right. Unsure what to say, I told her that I was tired. I must have zoned out. I needed to get some sleep. Trudging up the stairs to the bedroom, I collapsed on the unmade mattress and drifted off into a deep slumber. As I slept, my dreams were filled with that dark feeling of being observed, as if eyes were watching me closely from the corner of the bedroom in the shadows. When I awoke, it was still dark outside. I looked around the pitch-black room, feeling uneasy, and saw unfamiliar shapes and shadows I didn't recognize. That sensation of being watched had returned tenfold, and I felt a presence observing me from the corner, where a man-shaped shadow stood. Running over to the door, I went to turn on the light switch. I flicked it into the on position, but the light didn't turn on, the room remaining stubbornly dark. My heart was pounding as I felt that presence staring at me in the room. I wanted more than anything to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't go on. For some reason, I found myself going back to bed instead of fleeing that room, terrified as I was. I found myself lying back down in bed, tucking myself back in under the covers, and staring at the thing in the corner as it watched me. That dark, unrecognizable shape in the corner of the bedroom began to move towards me. The shadow shape of a person reaching out for me, coming for me. I tried to move, but I found myself paralyzed and unable. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. I woke up panting, covered in a cold sweat, and I realized I had dreamt the whole thing. The shape in the corner of the room had revealed itself in the morning light. I saw that it was, in fact, a stack of boxes with coats draped over the top of it. It was barely sunrise outside, and Christine was in bed next to me. She bolted upright, looking startled, and asked what had happened. I had a horrible dream. It felt so real. You know those waking nightmares when you feel as if you're up, walking around, being asleep, only to realize you were out the whole time? My wife didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something across the room. She was looking at the dresser, and her jaw was hanging down. "What is that thing doing in here? I told you to get rid of it, and you brought it up here and opened it instead?" She was pointing at something, and I followed her gaze to see the black box from the basement was on the bureau. It was open, but I had no memory of doing that. What the hell? I didn't do that. I definitely didn't open it. Did I? You're telling me you don't remember bringing that box in here and opening it? No, and it was locked. I couldn't have opened it. Just get it out of here. I don't want to look at it anymore, okay? Bring it to the dump or something. Just get it out of the house and far away from here. I went over to the dresser, and I saw the open box was filled with strange items. A lock of hair, charred piece of clothing, cross, other burnt pieces. There was a powerful odor coming from it as well, unlike anything I'd ever come across. The stench was unpleasant. It burnt my nostrils as I drew closer. This is impossible. I know I didn't bring this in here. It's cursed or something. Just get it out of the house, please. My wife was more upset than I'd ever seen her, so I put on my clothes. I took the box out to the car with me. I don't know where the local dump was exactly, but I figured I would go look for it. As I neared the town, I saw an antique shop at the side of the road, pulled over on a whim. I wondered if the owner would be interested in taking the box off my hands, or if he could at least tell me what it was. The bell above the door rang as I entered, and a man came out from the back room, polishing a brass candelabra with a rag. "Morning," he said in a friendly voice. "How can I help?" He stopped speaking abruptly when he saw it was in my hand. The candelabra fell to the floor with a loud clang. He began to visibly shake as he raised his finger to point at the box. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. "Where did you find that thing?" We just moved in up the road, my wife and I. It was in the basement of the old farmhouse up the street." I moved towards him with my hands out to shake his hand, and saw that my fingers were smudged black with the box's darkness. He backed away, slamming into the wall behind him, sending a framed photo crashing to the floor, the glass shattering loudly. "Don't touch me! Don't touch anything! Get out! Get out! Put that back where you found it! If you do anything else with it, you will never get your life back. You should have never taken it from its resting place. You should have never come here." I backed away from him, terrified even more than before, especially now that I knew others were aware of the dark powers this box contained. Whatever it wasn't meant to be moved. Its resting place was of extreme importance. Maybe that was why the house had been so cheap. It came with a cursed basement. The man began to throw things at me, shouting in a foreign language I didn't recognize. He was speaking harshly in English, telling me to leave and to never come back. He spoke in prayer-like incantations and made the sign of the cross over and over again. I stumbled out to my car and started the engine, driving back towards the farmhouse, wishing that we'd never purchased the place. When I pulled up outside the farmhouse, I tried to decide what to say to my wife. How would I explain to her that the box couldn't be moved? Maybe if we just left it in the basement, the presence would leave us alone. I decided I would just try to sneak in and put it back in the basement without her noticing. I would explain it to her later, or at least try to. The important thing now seemed to be to return it to its proper place before something really terrible happened. Going back inside the house quietly, I closed the front door behind me as softly as I could, and I glanced up the stairs. The light was off in the bedroom, so I assumed Christine would still be up there. I went to the basement door and I opened it quietly, being careful not to make too much noise in case Christine had gone back to sleep again upstairs. I began heading down into the darkness beneath the house. I was holding the box carefully in my hands like a living bomb, since I wasn't sure what would happen if I dropped it or did anything wrong. Each creaking stair made my heart hammer faster as I trod down towards the dirt floor of the basement. Finally, I set foot down there and looked around, seeing only shadows. The light from upstairs was dim, and it was the only source I had to see by. My phone was in my pocket, and I kept it there, thinking I would only be down there for a few moments. Walking across the blackened space towards the alcove, which had housed the black box, I began to feel watched again. It was only then that I noticed that sensation had gone for a while. As I drove to the antique store and back again, whatever had been with the box watching me, it hadn't stayed inside after the thing had opened. It had stayed in the house with my wife. A loud bang came from the top of the stairs, and the entire basement went completely pitch black in an instant. I realized the door had slammed shut, and I figured Christine had closed it. Maybe she didn't realize I was home. I began to fumble for the cell phone in my pocket, needing a bit of light to feel safe down here in the terrifying basement. But before I could grab it, something attacked me. The shrieking wail it made was inhuman and full of rage. It swiped at me with sharp claws in the darkness, and I rolled and I ducked away from it, trying to escape. I threw the box down on the floor, hoping to get away. As I got up, I hit my head on a dangling wooden cross and nearly got wrapped up in the twine which suspended it from the ceiling. Stumbling, I tried to find my way to the stairs, screaming for my wife to help me. She didn't answer. A moment later, the thing came at me again. It was fast, but thin and just a bit weaker than me, despite its anger. I managed to grab its wrists and push it up against the wall, then tripped it to the floor. I ran up the stairs, stumbling on the steps and scraping my shins, bloodying them badly, and just as I reached the top, the thing came at me again. It was relentless. It was screaming ancient curses with spittle flying in my face. It swiped at my eyes and got one of them, blinding me. The door was just behind me, so I flung it open and I shoved the thing away from me. As the light from the main level came flooding through the open door, I saw what had been attacking me. My wife tumbled down the stairs, cracking her head open against the wall on the way down, and falling lifeless to the dirt floor of the basement below. I took a few shaky steps down the stairs, looking to confirm if my eyes had deceived me, but they had not. The thing in the box had stayed behind when I left, and it had possessed my wife, driving her down into the darkness of its lair, where it felt most at home. As I stood there staring at her lifeless body, I saw her begin to twitch. Her fingers began to drum up and down, then her head began to rock and make a loud smacking sound as her forehead impacted the basement floor again and again and again, hard. "Christine?" I called down the stairs. "Stop! Stop, please!" She continued to self-destructive behavior, smashing her skull hard against the dirt floor. I began to take a shaky step down to stop her, but then hesitated. That thing was still inside of her. It wasn't safe, and yet I couldn't let her just keep hurting herself like that. The meaty sound repeated again and again as I screamed for her to stop, but she wouldn't. But I wouldn't go down there again. And eventually the thing inside of her realized that. "Come save me, honey," she said in a droning beehive voice. "I need you." No. I just stood at the top of the stairs waiting. My wife appeared to have broken a few limbs during her fall, but that didn't stop her from moving quickly. Sickening sounds of bones crunching could be heard from up the stairs as she got to her feet, her one ankle failing so that she rested her weight on the splintered nub of her tibia rather than on her foot. Whatever was inside of her felt no pain, but it looked agonizing to me. She began to shuffle up the wooden stairs without warning, moving faster than I thought possible, crab-like and inhuman on 4 legs. It looked like she wouldn't be able to make it in her fractured bones, and yet she moved like a relentless insect, her other limbs making up for the defects of the lost one. Using her arms like additional legs, she began to crawl towards me up the stairs, her fingernails digging into the splintered wood stairs and breaking off as she raced faster and faster, gaining momentum. I realized at the last second that I'd been paralyzed with terror, and I threw the door shut, just as she slammed into it with a shuddering bang that rattled the upstairs windows and their frames. There was no lock on the door, and I could do nothing except hold it closed with all the weight of my body. She doesn't relent for a second, turning the doorknob consistently, pressing with all of her strength against the door as I gritted my teeth and fight against her weight. I'm sitting here, with my back pressed against the door, my feet wedged against the opposing wall, with all the force I can muster. When I finish typing this out, I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll try the police, see what they say. My biggest concern is that they'll want to let her out. She'll probably pretend to be normal when they arrive. She'll pretend that I'm insane, that I attacked her. But I know that's not her. It's the thing from the basement. The thing from the black box. Whatever it is, she can't be allowed to bring it back to the surface. It was locked down in that basement for a reason. And that's where it needs to stay. I found this journal in my local gym alongside some odd-looking workout supplements. I've been debating using them, but I'm not sure. What's written in the journal has me second-guessing myself, so I'll copy the contents here. Tell me what you guys think I should do. God damn it, Jerry, I told you before, it's never gonna happen. You already had your chance. Those were the final words the last time I spoke to my ex-wife. I'm 6'3" tall and 240 pounds. I had grown into an average dad bod and not very athletically shaped, but by no means fat, yet she still left me with the excuse that I was too fat for her. I begged and I pleaded with her, claiming I could lose some weight. I would work out until I was back to her liking. She was willing to hear none of it. Her mind was made up. She was leaving. Yeah, like many of my friends had suggested, I thought there might be something else behind the scenes. I mean, she could have been leaving me for someone else that she had been seeing. I didn't want to picture her thinking about that possibility. I felt that if I didn't imagine it, then it would prevent it from being true. I wanted her back, no matter how much I worked for it. My thought was to lose weight and get into shape, and then maybe I could call her, show her how much I had changed. In my delusional mind, this sounded like the perfect plan. I mean, what's a few weeks at the gym and eating healthier? It's probably something I should have been doing either way, just for myself. So that's what I was going to do. I began by going to the grocery store. I planned all my meals for the next week, paying close attention to the number of calories and sugar and fat content of each item. I figured that if the average person required 2,000 calories per day, just as a baseline, I'd be working out and exercising plus reducing my calorie intake to 1,500 per day. I mean, I'm no doctor or dietitian or anything like that. Honestly, I'm just some dude who works in IT for a call center, but that method made sense. Burn more calories than you take in means you lose weight instead of gaining it, right? Going to the gym every day on top of that would help me tone and at least slightly look more muscular along with all the weight that I'd be losing. I felt fantastic on my way home from the store. dreaming about how good I was going to look and how quickly I'd be able to do it if I was determined enough, you know? I thought over and over to myself that this was going to work. I'd soon be getting my ex-wife Stephanie back. Starting the next day was the first day of my mission. I was going to get up extra early, pack my meals for the day, go to the gym for an hour, then to work, then back to the gym for another hour or so. That was going to be my routine every day until I made it where I wanted to be. And she took me back. After the first week, I felt terrific. After my Friday workout, I stepped on the scale and I learned that I had already lost 5 pounds. My plan was working, and I had gone from wanting to lose 50 to 45 pounds in 1 week. My body felt better. I don't know if it was just the delusion of how good I felt, but I thought I already looked more fit. I already looked more muscular. Again, that weekend I went to the store and I planned out my meals for the next week. I thought Stephanie was bound to be impressed and take me back when I completed my transformation. That Sunday night, I was too excited about my progress to stay up, and I went to bed early to wake up and get to the gym the next day. The second week felt rough. My muscles, my body became sore from all the new strain. When I stepped on the scale that Friday at the gym, I noticed I had somehow gained back the 5 pounds from the week before. There was no excuse I could think of for not keeping on the same loss pattern as before. As I've been told many times before in my life, muscle weighs more than fat. The only problem was when I looked in the mirror, I didn't feel like I'd gained much muscle. My stomach still hadn't changed from the flabby gut that I started with. Still, I stuck to my diet and workout routine. The third week, I noticed a strange man that I would often see sitting on a bench in the back of a locker room. He sat in basketball shorts and a hoodie with an oversized hood that dropped down over his face, concealing it in shadows. Every part of exposed skin seemed to bulge with lean muscle. Nothing about the man himself was strange, but what I did find odd was that I never saw him out on the floor lifting any weights, or really anything but sitting there. I never saw him leave or enter the locker room, but he sat there 3 or 4 days a week. I ignored his presence for the most part. Yet after rechecking my weight that Friday and seeing that I had gained another 4 pounds again without losing any of my gut, I couldn't seem to get the image of him sitting there on the bench at the back of the locker room out of my mind. I thought how eerie it was that I never saw the man move. Nearly to the point I'm not sure I even noticed him breathing, although I know he was. The shadow of his hood hid his dark, stoic face. I didn't know if he sat watching all the gym patrons as they came and went, or if there was another purpose for his absence in the locker room. After so long of thinking about it, I concluded that he must be some sort of security guard, some kind of officer to prevent people from stealing things from the lockers or the gym bags. Although the guy put off a very creepy vibe, it sort of made sense to have someone in there. It was like having a living security camera when you couldn't legally put a camera in there. My new conclusion of the strange man's purpose still didn't entirely sit right with me, but it was enough for me to carry on with my workout without overthinking it. Though not entirely, I grew accustomed to seeing the man there when I went to the gym. It almost became a ritual for me to check if he was there or not, every day when I entered the locker room. I learned that he was in there 5 days a week, but the days that he was gone were never the same, and were never back to back. 1 week he'd be gone Monday and Thursday, while he might be gone Wednesday and Friday the next. By the end of the second month of paying close attention to my diet and going to the gym every day, I had only seen very little progress. I had only lost 6 pounds and gained minimal muscle definition. At this rate, it'd be forever before I could get the chiseled physique I needed to get my wife back. I had to keep trying, though. I didn't want to get back into the dating scene again, and she was perfect for me as far as I was concerned. I didn't know what I had done to win her over in the first place, but if she said that my being out of shape was the problem, well, that was something I could fix. I just had to keep working on it. However, in the back of my mind, I knew that if it took too long, my moment might pass and I would never be able to get her back. I began looking online, searching and watching through every little lose your belly fat with this one weird trick I could find, trying to find something that would work for me. I researched all the latest diets and exercise tips and tricks, tried different weight loss supplements, and did nearly anything else that I could think of. In my head, time was running out and I needed to hurry this along. When she left me, she told me that she didn't want me to talk to her. I knew that I could change her mind if I did this. Every day, the massive man sat watching me show up, change, push myself into the point of collapse before returning exhausted to the locker room. He would watch as I finished every day by stepping up to the scale and returning to the bench utterly defeated. And then it happened. He spoke but a single question, as well as moved. I had grown so accustomed to him sitting motionless that I had all but forgotten he was even there. So it startled me to see him move and hear him speak. His voice was deep, guttural, booming. What would you sacrifice to become? I didn't understand the question, as well clearly shown on my face. My confusion only increased as I watched the behemoth of a man rise from his typical seated position. His footsteps thundered on the ground as he walked to leave the locker room. He was clearly off to whatever else it was he did. And in my panic for answers, I began to bombard him with queries about his odd, chosen question. Become what? Stronger? Thinner? I'd give anything. Please, how can I look like that? No response came from him as he moved. Instead, he simply turned the corner and disappeared. I rushed out of the locker room after him, hoping to get more answers to my questions, but as I entered the main gym area in a panic, I was met with nothing but confused looks. I called out into the gym, asking where the man went. I asked frantically 3 times before one of the trainers pulled me aside and began to speak to me. Sir, I need you to calm down and explain. Seem to have lost someone. Can you describe them for me? What the fuck do you mean describe him? He was like 7 foot tall, black guy, built like a brick shithouse. I mean, seriously, the guy looked like he chugged gallons of steroids and snorted protein powder. There's no way in hell you could have missed him. He was huge. So where did he go? Did this man take something from you? Did they assault you in some form or another? What? No. God damn it. He said something to me and he walked out. I need to know what he meant. Please, this is important to me. Okay, now, again, where did he go? At this point, another muscle-ridden personal trainer from the gym had shown up and led the 3 of us into the back office. Sir, my name's Garrett. I guess you can consider me as the manager on duty. So we can check the cameras. We can see if we can find a way to know where they went. Garrett led the way, following me and the other trainer that never stated his name, and I didn't care enough to ask. The office was small and quaint. It was sparsely furnished with little more than a small desk and a couple of plastic and wire chairs. A large monitor sat on the desk connected to a slightly outdated computer. The walls were furnished much like I would expect a gym addict's dorm room to look. Posters of protein shake powders, pre-workout supplements, some guy in a Speedo flexing an alarming number of muscles at the most recent Mr. Universe or, I don't know, some other weightlifting idol. Typically, I'm a man of moderate to impressive amounts of patience. However, something about being within those walls caused all the patience to expel from my body faster than a colony of mice in a burning building. Finally, after some quick typing, a few loud sighs, and some mouse clicks, Garrett turned to me to speak. You sure this man left the locker room? Yes, I'm sure. Why do you ask? And how does nobody know what I'm talking about? This behemoth of a guy is in the locker room nearly every damn day. I thought that he was some type of security guy for you. Now you're telling me that he isn't? Sir, I feel this is only going to confuse you more, but you were the only person in or out of the locker room for the past 30-ish minutes now. What? Yeah, no joke. Look for yourself, he said, as he turned the large monitor to face me. Chet, can you go check the locker room to see if there's anyone in there that might fit the guy's description? The other trainer, apparently named Chet, simply nodded and left the room. I watched as Garrett clicked back onto the camera timeline to the point where I first entered the locker room after my workout. As the seconds ticked by into minutes, I watched as no other souls even came near the entrance, let alone went in or came out. Finally, after a few moments of watching the tape, I saw my own face emerge from the doorway, plastered with a look of frantic confusion. I felt as though my brain was short-circuiting. I knew I had seen him leave. I heard the question he boomed at me as he passed. I could feel the vibrations on the floor as his footsteps moved him through the room, yet the video did not show even the slightest hint of him leaving ahead of me. Suddenly embarrassed at the situation, I shook my head, trying to clear it. Thoughts began to cross my mind that I may have dreamt the entire scenario up. I looked at Garrett, still slightly confused, as I rose from my seat. I'm sorry. I haven't been sleeping lately. I must have fallen asleep at the locker room or something. Again, I'm so sorry for the hassle. It must have been some really vivid dream or something. Garrett stood up for a second, looking me over with a very skeptical look that he couldn't seem to hide. After a few short seconds, he matched my pose and stood from his chair before responding. Well, in that case, sir, I suggest you head home and get much-needed sleep. Remember, rest is essential for muscle recovery. He flashed me a very smug grin, and it was all I could do to prevent myself from rolling my eyes at him before leaving the room. As I walked back to the locker room to gather my things, I again ran into Chet, who decided to stop me. Hey, sir, I couldn't find any trace of the guy you were talking about. You sure everything's cool, bro? Yeah, I'm good. I'm all good. I spoke with Garrett a little more, and I think I may have just dreamt it up due to some sleep deprivation. Oh, okay. Well, rest is important to muscle recovery. Yeah, I know. Garrett said the same thing to me. I interrupted. I'm gonna head home and let myself recover, as you call it. Chet seemed slightly offended that I finished his sentence for him, and left for the office without another word. As I reached for my bag and left to go, I noticed that something felt off about it. It felt heavier than I remembered it being when I brought it in. Not just by a few ounces, either. If that had been the case, I doubt I would have noticed. It was heavier by 5 or more pounds, acting a little more enthusiastically than was necessary for the situation. I dropped the bag, I ripped the zipper open, and I threw the flap back. Sitting under an extra pair of gym shorts was a small container that looked to have some sort of pills inside, along with 2 tubes of a very strange-looking cream. The labeling on the item was a paradox. They somehow looked both amateur and professional at the same time. It was as if a bootleg copy was actually the real deal. The tubes of cream had a picture of a very gaunt but happy-looking person with a cartoon-looking speech bubble. Inside the bubble were the words, "The weight just falls off." I couldn't help but admit that something about the advertising seemed very compelling to me. I mean, after trying nearly everything else I had found, maybe this one would be what I needed to drop the pounds and get my ex-wife back. I decided to take the cream and pills back to my place to inspect them further. As I turned to leave, I caught a quick glance at myself in the mirror. My ex-wife's voice instantly bellowed through my mind. How do you expect me to love you when you're as fat and lazy as you've gotten? Some people might think that she was being mean and rude, but it's okay because she was right. And how could she love me when I had put on an extra 10 or 20 pounds? That's not the person she married. I'd become a fat slob, and it was okay for her to feel like that and say that stuff, right? And either way, it didn't matter because I was going to lose the weight. I was going to get her back. I just hoped that this new stuff would do the trick. The strangeness of how it appeared in my bag was easily overshadowed by the possibility of it helping me achieve what I wanted. When I got home, I dumped my gym bag out into the counter like a drunk girl trying to find her car keys. I grabbed the container of pills and began reading the label. It seemed to be the same branding as the tube of cream, and in my excitement, I merely skimmed over a lot of the information written until I got to the directions for use. The bottle told me, for the best results, take 1 pill morning and night for a month. I thought that would be easy enough, and it even said that it didn't need an extensive workout regimen to go with it. The instructions for the cream were even more straightforward. They said apply cream to problem areas once a day, and the fat-burning ingredients would make it all fall away. I figured that if I used these 2 items, plus I kept up my workouts, I'd lose the weight and be back with my ex in no time at all. It seemed like a relatively foolproof plan to me, and even if I had no proof that it was him, I knew that the strange giant of a man from the locker room was the one that left this stuff in my bag. I thought to myself that whether or not he responded, I needed to thank him next time I saw him. Those first few days, I decided to only take the pills, and I'd add the cream after the first week. The pills made my jaw ache and made me feel like I had turned into a furnace. The amount of heat that began to radiate from my body alarmed me at first. However, I soon began to think, this must be why they called it fat burning. The sudden rise in body heat caused me to feel the need to check my temperature. Although it was definitely elevated, it never seemed to reach what I would consider fever levels. After the first week, I began to add the cream to my weight loss regime. It was very similar to the pills in the sense that it caused wherever I applied it to have an intense burning sensation. They worked, though. Getting a bit more excited about it. In the first 2 weeks, I had lost 8 pounds, which was better than what I had accomplished in the months at the gym before. I was hooked. It worked so well, I even stopped going to the gym. I mean, I didn't need to anymore. As long as I followed the directions, the weight just kept going away. By the time I had lost 12 pounds, all I could think about was losing more. The only thing on my mind was waiting till I could take the next pill. I quickly lost any desire to eat or even sleep. Pacing back and forth from the counter in the kitchen to the scale in the bathroom, I suddenly remembered my original purpose. Her words again rang in my mind. Some comment about how being the fat, ugly fuck that I was, nobody would ever want to love me. Her exact words didn't matter because as I stood on the scale for the 10th time that day, I noticed that I had lost another pound since that morning. I was going to do it. I was going to win her back for sure. I yelled out in excitement at the progress I was seeing. I know I already used the cream today, but what could it hurt if I double it up? Should cause it to work faster, shouldn't it? I muttered to myself as I walked to the counter. Putting on a second coat of the cream caused my flesh to burn much more than usual, but it also somehow began to give me a numbing sensation. The nerves in my stomach and chest dulled to the point that I could barely feel my finger as I poked my belly. Well, that's an interesting side effect, I thought to myself. As I finished rubbing the layer over my body, the numb feeling began to overtake my entire form, and as much as I thought that it was better than the burning pain, it proved to cause normal functions to become difficult. My balance seemed to be thrown off because of the fact that I couldn't feel when my feet touched the ground. After that first day, I began to understand how to function, basically without my sense of touch. It took a lot of guessing and a lot of trial and error, but by the end of the day, I seemed to be able to move around as if nothing had happened. I even convinced myself to check the scale and mirror. I looked skinnier and I felt lighter. The scale said that I had only lost another 4 pounds, but I thought that if I began to use the cream twice a day instead of once, I'd be able to lose weight much faster, and finally, I'd be able to get my ex-wife back. She would be so pleased by my progress. I just knew it. The next day, after putting on my second layer of cream and taking the pills as always, I decided that with losing the weight, I should start going back to the gym to build some muscle in place of my missing fat. Driving my car to the gym with my body completely numb proved to be much more dangerous than I had anticipated, but I managed to make it in one piece. I walked in filled with more confidence than I'd ever had, until I began to hear the whispers. Hey, look at that guy. Ugh, why does he look like that? Is it safe for him to be in here? That looks really bad. Is his skin boiling? That's disgusting. Yeah, why is he all yellow and purple like that? I did my best to ignore everything that I heard and just get on with my workout. As I was doing curls with some free weights, I was able to see what they had been talking about. The mirror before me displayed a terrifying sight. The skin on my biceps and around my ribs had turned a yellowish purple. Blisters began to form over the bruises. The voice in my head began to scream about how disgusting I looked. My focus quickly shifted from my own reflection to the reflection of everyone else in the gym. They looked like they were hidden behind various pieces of equipment, snickering at me. I could feel their eyes on me, and the sudden flood of embarrassment filled my body with fear. But what if I stayed like this? What if I was getting sick from the cream? Do I need to go to the hospital? I nearly crushed my feet as I dropped the weights in my hands and tried sprinting out of the door. After the first few strides, my numbing coordination failed me, and I fell hitting the ground hard. I could feel a few of the blisters on my chest and arms burst as I made contact with the matted floor. I quickly stood up and rushed again for the door, again falling after only a few strides. My heart pounded in my chest and I screamed out in pain as more blisters broke and drug raw flesh across the ground. Pus poured from the blisters, and in a sad attempt to reduce the scene that I was creating, I stood again and attempted more of a calculated walk to my car. By the time I made it there, I convinced myself that all the hospital would do was waste my time on something that I could do myself at home. So instead, I stopped on the way home, and I purchased antibiotic creams, I purchased bandages, and a large roll of gauze. When I reached my house and made it inside, I removed my shirt, only to realize it was much worse than I thought. Or possibly had progressed since I left the gym. My entire torso, everywhere I had used the cream, had turned into a black, yellow, and purple bruise. Various blisters covered my chest and had burst, leaving a disgusting yellow trail of pus flowing down my body. The smell of necrotic flesh filled my nostrils as the yellow ooze flowed from my burst blisters. I quickly wrapped my wounds in bandages and gauze as I repeated the same few phrases over and over again. It's working so well. I can deal with this. It'll go away after I'm done. I just gotta keep going. As soon as I was done wrapping up all of my new development, I couldn't stop myself from getting on the scale. I had lost nearly 50 pounds. And bandaged chest aside, I felt like I looked great. I at least felt like I looked better than I did, but I was also beginning to see myself the way Stephanie saw me. I wasn't perfect yet. I at least felt like I looked better than I did, but I also began to see myself the way Stephanie saw me. I wasn't perfect yet, and I could lose more weight and gain more muscle. I was too excited by how far I had come, and I sent a message to my ex, asking me to meet up and see what she thought of my progress. I was already convinced that I had made strides in my progress, and honestly, I thought that I had already achieved the look that she was looking for. Somehow, I'll admit, I was slightly surprised when she agreed. That Friday, she agreed to have dinner with me. That was only a few days away, and I could still lose more by then. Everything was going just the way I had imagined it would. I knew the boils and bruises were there, but I could always hide them with bandages and a shirt. I couldn't even begin to describe the excitement that filled my body at the thought of getting my wife back. I did my best not to bother her until Friday, which wasn't very hard because I focused on my new routine. The cream still burned my skin as I put it on, but it seemed to be working. The blisters and the discoloration seemed to be getting worse. But I could worry about that after I had dinner with Stephanie. After all, I could just hide it until later when I finally stopped needing the pills and the cream. The pills seemed to increase the effects exponentially. I did notice that my skin had turned wet and slimy around the blistering areas. I just thought that as long as it didn't spread to an area I couldn't cover up with pants and a shirt, I'd be fine. I was only slightly scared at realizing that with all the exercise and very limited diet, my health began to decline. However, I simply kept thinking of a couple of old sayings like, beauty is pain and the risk is worth the reward. I got to her old favorite restaurant early. That way I could be there with a table waiting for her. The place wasn't a 5-star place, but it was fancy. Food was terrific. The table I got wasn't at the front window, but it was close enough for me to see her walk up to the building. My heart raced with anticipation. I was so excited at how well this was going to go. She walked in and I could see as the hostess led her over to my table, she looked up. She stopped about 10 feet short of the table with a jaw-dropped smile before beginning to speak, or rather exclaim, "Oh my God, look at you! You look so much better!" The dinner was great. I was as giddy as a schoolgirl because it was going just as I had imagined. As we stood up just before leaving, my heart screamed with desire for things to go back to how they were before. The reality of what was going on with my body snapped back into the front of my head as she went in for a hug. As her body pressed against mine, I could feel a few more blisters on my chest burst beneath the bandages. Walking out of the restaurant, she nearly caused my jaw to fall to the floor. She whispered something in my ear. Why don't we go back to my place for a while? I nearly had a miniature panic attack as my heart began to race. This was going so much better than I'd even dreamed of. If she wanted to do what I thought she wanted to do, I didn't know what to do about the wounds and the bruises all over my body. I was terrified that she would see, but followed that thought by telling myself that I could just keep my shirt on. Everything would be fine. I would just still hide it until I could deal with it another time. It'd work out great until later when I could focus on that problem. Oh, well, I suppose with how good it's been seeing you, what better way to end the night? I finally responded. On the one hand, it felt as though we were moving extremely fast, but I also realized that it wasn't very long ago that we were married. That afterthought made me feel even more that things were just getting back to how they were, rather than starting over, so to speak. As we lay in our bed, things quickly became serious. I tried my hardest to get in the mood for what was to come, but every time she rubbed against my body, I could feel another blister burst under the bandages. I prayed to gods I didn't even believe in that the smell wouldn't permeate the bandages or give everything away. Finally, she removed her clothes in front of me, and I once again saw the amazing body I so missed. She said the words I'd been dreading most. Your turn. Take those clothes off. I removed my pants, but I kept my shirt on, and I went in to progress the night, but she stopped me. Shirt too. I want to see all those new muscles you have. I can't. There's something up with my chest. I'd rather keep the shirt on. Take the shirt off, or this isn't happening, she demanded. I removed my shirt. Reluctantly, as fear flooded my body, I only exposed the bandages, but it was enough to cause my fear to spike as she spoke. Why are you all wrapped up? Take it off. I want to see. No, trust me. You don't right now. This will go better if you don't see it. Remove it now, she said in a rather unnecessarily stern voice. Sheepishly, I removed the bandages, revealing the boils and blisters that covered my chest and stomach. Her instant repulsion floored me and caused my heart to slam into my stomach as it fell. She retched and nearly puked off the side of the bed, screaming the same two words over and over. Get out. I grabbed my clothes, and for some reason the bandages, and I ran out of the house as I put it all back on. Part of me felt ashamed, yet my brain began screaming at me that I could fix this. I could make my body perfect. I just had to get back to the gym. I had to keep using the products. That's all that I needed to make this work. But unfortunately, I couldn't help myself from giving in to that second thought. The next day I was back at the gym. I was pushing myself to the limits as I drove myself to form the perfect body. The creams, the pills, they helped. As I struggled through the burn and the blisters, however, I noticed that no matter how much of the supplements I used, they always remained just as full as if I'd never opened them. The blisters and the bruises began spreading over my entire body. I could see it traveling down my arms and my legs as I used it more and more. I had grown accustomed to ignoring the remarks and snickers of other gym inhabitants. I'd burst a new blister, releasing that foul-smelling pus with each rep, and I could tell, as everyone seemed to keep their distance from me. I assumed that it was from the looks or the wounds or the smell, but I knew that I could make my body perfect if I kept going. I would make it suitable for her, no matter what. The following week, I finally learned just how bad it had gotten. I walked into the gym with a welcoming party of disgusted looks and people going out of their way to avoid me. I dropped my bag off in the locker room. I took the pills. I rubbed the cream all over my blister-covered body, popping a few. As I walked out onto the gym floor, my clumsiness caused me to run shoulder first into one of the machines. The next few moments became a blur as I heard a wet splash followed by screaming. I ricocheted off of that machine and I bumped into another. The second impact was quickly followed by another sloppy splat of a sound and more screaming, and by the time I looked down, I'd realized chunks of skin and flesh had fallen from my body with each impact. The splashing sound had been the meat landing on the floor. I felt my heart skip a beat as one of the trainers approached me. Chet was his name, and he seemed very concerned. Instead of responding to his patronizing claims, saying that I needed a hospital immediately and that he was a breath away from removing me from the gym, I panicked. I ran from him to the locker room. Pulling the cream and the pills from my bag, I threw them as hard as I could to the locker room corner, causing them to bounce off the massive man that I noticed was once again sitting in his usual place. I had so many questions for him, but all I could get out was, why? Why me? He stood as he spoke his final words, traversing the locker room and walking out the door. Your greed was your demise. Did you get what you wanted? Or as Icarus, did you fly too close to the sun? Your tragedy is your own doing. I sat nearly in tears in the locker room, terrified, scribbling furiously in my journal as his words dug deep into my mind. Seconds after his footsteps left the locker room, hurried men ran into the room, pushing a gurney. My heart raced, my nerves tensed as I let out a brief horrified scream as I looked down, realizing I had begun bleeding profusely after my skin had removed itself while watching him watch over me. Sir, are you all right? Said one of the paramedics. I can fix this. I can fix this. I can make this perfect. I don't know how long I have to write this. Actually, I'm not sure how long I'll still be alive. I don't know how, but it's all coming true. Everything she said is coming true. I'm sorry, I'm getting too far ahead here. This is just... God, I barely even know where to begin here. I guess I should just start with the laundromat itself. It's the old laundromat that's situated right at the edge of the city. Ned's Washers. The place itself is old as hell, being around since probably at least the 70s. And it's one of those that's fitted with a couple arcade machines to keep the little ones occupied while the adults are busy. The outside looks like it's barely holding itself together, with the sign on the front being faded and torn so bad that it now reads Ed's Ashes. The inside looks a little bit better, but not by much. You can still see its age with cracks in the walls in certain places, as well as paint chipped from the walls, particularly in the restrooms, or at least the women's restroom. Bottom line, the place has seen quite a bit of mileage. That said, it was still a nice enough place, and Ned, the owner himself, was a sweet old man that always made my trips there all the more enjoyable. By telling me exaggerated ghost stories about his fishing trips up in the mountains. Even if I personally didn't believe in ghosts or that sort of thing, though I might be rethinking my stance on that. I'd been using Ned's Washers for about 3 years now. Ever since I finally moved out of my folks' house and got an apartment, they have washing machines at my apartment complex, but for some reason, there seems to be some sort of cosmic force that tells everyone that they should all hog the machines for the day anytime I plan to wash clothes. Plus, on the 2 or 3 occasions I did get lucky and was able to access them, they never seemed to get all the stains out, no matter what detergent I used. They always came out of the dryer still damp. Now, Ned's, my clothes always came out clean, dry, and fresh, even smelling a lot nicer, too. In short, despite the machines being free at the apartment complex, the quality and availability made it worth it, in my opinion, to just hit up Ned's whenever it was laundry day. Bianca, my roommate, and best friend since freshman year of high school, also felt the same. So we typically either go together or we take turns washing for the both of us. The place was never usually all that busy, usually only having about 2 or 3 others in place whenever I'd be there. The most I'd ever see is about 5 others. Of these is the old lady I mentioned earlier, the one who now causes me to lose sleep. She'd always be sitting alone in from one of those washing machines at the far end of the laundromat. Always alone. Regardless of how many others were there, singing softly. Because there usually wasn't much going on in the place, it wasn't hard to hear her singing. Though at least for a while, I never actually could make out the things she said in her serenades. Despite this, I always found her voice beautiful and smooth, if not a bit mournful. She was short, very pale, looking almost sick. She was very thin, always wearing an old green dress with a veiled hood that she always had pulled over her face. Even still, though, she still looked like just a sweet old lady. I remember always thinking that there was just something about her, something cerebral, something fantastic, if that makes any sense. I don't know anyone who ever tried to talk to her or engage with her. Actually, being completely honest, it seemed like they didn't even notice her there. Like, they couldn't see her. I guess that was just something that interested me more about her. She was just there. Oblivious to the world around her, with the world being just as much so to her. The other thing about her, though, was that I never saw her anywhere else in the town. Only there in Ned's washers. Given how small my town is, being one of those everybody knows where and how everybody sleeps types, this struck me as especially weird. I mean, sure, maybe she could have been not from around here. But then that begs the question of how far exactly she'd be coming from and how she's managing to always be there every time I was. I mean, like I said, I'd been hitting up the place at least 2, sometimes 3 times a month for at least the past 3 years, and every time, there she'd be, singing while she either folded, turned inside out, or wrung out her clothes at the back of the laundromat. I thought about trying to go up and talk to her, figure out who she was, but being the painfully shy for my own good type of girl I've always been since I was little, my anxiety always kicked in, and I always ended up talking myself out of it. It was a couple months ago, however, that I decided to ask Ned about it. Maybe he knows her. A friend of his, maybe. When I asked him, though, he looked at me like he hadn't the slightest clue what the hell I was talking about. You know, the old lady over there. I pointed to the other side where she was, humming while she was folding what looked like a pair of pants. You know her? He shook his head. No, I'm afraid I don't rightfully know, sweetheart. The look on his face told me, though, that he still didn't seem to know what I was even talking about. Like he, too, didn't seem to see her. Oh, I replied. Well, I always see her in here, so I figured you'd know. Afraid not. Then again, though, old age is catching up with me, so I'm not the most reliable one to ask. He laughed and said, Hell, the only reason I even remember you is because you're always yakking with me, so I can't really forget about you. I couldn't help but laugh with him when he said that. It was true. He was starting to leave his prime. Still, I couldn't help but find it weird that Ned didn't notice her, even when I pointed her out to him. I decided to leave it be, though, and went on with washing my clothes. The place was dead, even more so than when I'd said earlier. It was one of the days where the only people there were me, Ned, and the old woman. Because of this lack of any other background noise, I could listen to the woman sing while I was waiting for my clothes to finish in the rinse cycle. Her voice was absolutely beautiful. It seemed to actually reach me. I know how cheesy that sounds, but I don't know how else to put it. Her voice was so sultry and smooth, sounding almost like she was singing a child to sleep. Think if you took the voice of Enya and mixed it together with a Scottish accent. That's what she sounded like. I tried to listen to her song, became more and more lost, though, in her tones. Eventually, I was able to discern a verse from one. Laurie had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Laurie had a little lamb whose heart was black as coal. Loved him, she did, but he be wicked and damned, wicked and damned, wicked and damned. Loved him, she did, but he be wicked and damned, without heart or soul. I found this to be equal parts interesting as well as odd. Again, her voice was beautiful, but the lyrics struck me as weird. For one thing, those obviously weren't the words to Mary Had a Little Lamb, despite her singing words to the tune. Secondly, why were the lyrics so depressing and rather ominous? Still, though, I continued to listen while I waited to put my load into the dryer. She continued singing. The horrid beast's name be Sam, name be Sam, name be Sam. The horrid beast's name be Sam, whose mind is dark and foul. In my focus, I almost didn't even hear the washing machine buzz when it finished. The longer I listened, the more I noticed her voice becoming sadder and sadder. I thought at any moment she was going to burst into tears. Being perfectly honest, whether because of the emotions and raw feelings evoked through her voice, or because of the lyrics themselves, I was feeling more and more depressed myself the more I listened to the old lady's song. But at the same time, it felt hypnotic in a way. Like I couldn't make myself stop listening to her. I'd get so lost in this that I actually lose track of the time again. I was just sitting there, continuing to listen to her sing one sad song after another, while she either folded or wrung out the clothes that she was washing, until I was abruptly snapped back to reality by Ned tapping me on the shoulder, telling me it was time to close up for the night. I looked to see that my load had been sitting in the dryer, long done by this point. Looking out the window, I saw that it was night. Christ, I thought. How was it night already? After apologizing to Ned for keeping him over, I quickly grabbed my stuff out of the dryer and went to my car. Just before leaving Ned's washers, though, I looked inside one last time to see that the old woman was still sitting there, washing clothes. This made me pause for a minute. How come Ned hadn't booted her out too? When I saw Ned come out and locking up, I decided to ask him about it. Hey, you do know she's still in there, right? He cocked his eyebrows at me. Huh? Who is? The old lady. I pointed to her through the window. See? He leaned into the glass for a second before looking at me again, confused. I'm afraid, sweetheart, that there's nobody in there. What are you talking about? She's right there, folding a pair of... I hesitated for a moment before saying, confused, a pair of jeans. Looking closer, I saw that she was folding what looked like a pair of jeans. Specifically, a pair of young woman's jeans. Now, before you start asking, yes, I realize how stupid that sounded. The reason this seemed so odd to me, though, was that they looked like they belonged to a much smaller woman. Much younger woman, maybe even a teenager, or at least a young adult, with sequin designs on the pockets and those rips that you'd see on the thigh areas. They were all the rage for high school girls. Maybe she has a granddaughter or something. Somehow, though, I couldn't tell you why, but that just wasn't the case here. In any case, it didn't really matter in the end because Ned still claimed he couldn't see anybody in the laundromat. By that point, it was getting on midnight, and I had to get home. I was getting hungry, and I hadn't eaten since that Arby's roast beef sandwich I grabbed for lunch on the way to Ned's, which is a problem for me because I have problems when it comes to my blood sugar levels getting too low, dizziness, nausea, stuff like that, if I don't eat for long periods of time. Because of this, and because everything on my end of town closed for the night half an hour before, the drive home was tense, with me trying not to lose consciousness at the wheel. When I got back to my apartment, I found that on the front of the door was a note from Bianca, saying she'd gone out and that her sister, Loretta, and her boyfriend was crashing there for the night. The lights were off and everything was quiet, so I went in as quietly as I could. Immediately after opening the door, though, I was hit with a horrid smell. The smell of something that died in the walls, mixed with straight BO. It was honestly everything I could do not to lose my stomach in the doorway there. I held my breath as I locked the door behind me and made my way to the kitchen. I still had to eat. God, Lordy, what the hell are you doing in here? It was in the kitchen that the smell seemed to be the strongest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I flicked on the lights. And what I saw then did cause me to throw up. Right there, in the middle of the kitchen floor, in the middle of the floor, splayed out across the kitchen tiles, was the body of a young woman. Now, at first, I was too disgusted and shocked to look long enough to see who it was. Then, however, seeing the dirty blonde hair and smooth, rosy cheeks now drained of color, my disgust transformed into horror. It was Loretta. It was the body of Bianca's younger sister, Loretta, little Lori, as I used to tease her. Immediately, I called the police, telling them that I'd found a young girl's body in my kitchen. The police were on their way, and I just stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, 10,000 thoughts crashing like an avalanche through my head. What the hell happened? Who did this? Why? God, what am I gonna tell B? I then broke from my stupor and called B to tell her, as collected as I could possibly try to be, what happened to Loretta. Unfortunately, even after calling at least 5 times and getting sent straight to voicemail, I had to leave a panicked message saying, B, oh my God, B, you gotta get over here now. It's Loretta. She's dead. The police arrived soon after and took over. When they asked, I told them I'd only just walked in the door when I found her. I showed them the note that B had left. You know of anyone who'd want to hurt her? One of the officers asked me. I shook my head. It was true. I didn't know who'd do this. Soon I heard thumping footsteps coming from the front door. Where is she? I looked to see Bianca standing at the opening of the kitchen, being blocked off by 2 of the officers. After telling them she was Loretta's sister, they let her through, and immediately seeing the body, she dropped to her knees and howled in grief as she cradled her sister's head. I'm so sorry, B, I cried out. She just kept wailing, crying out, oh God, not you, Lori. God, no. Eventually, the police led us out of the apartment into the hallway when the ambulance brought in the gurney. B turned away when they were bringing the body out, but I didn't. I watched them bring Lori out. It's because of this that I noticed it for the first time. It was while they were trying to wheel the gurney past the threshold of the front door that they hit a bump, causing her right leg to flop down limply. That was when I noticed she was wearing a pair of tight, dark blue jeans, with rips across the upper thigh area, and the reflective glint of a sequined flower was stitched on the pocket. Despite still being overcome with shock, grief, confusion, and about 100 so odd other feelings, it was all soon joined by a haunting sense of familiarity. A sense of déjà vu, almost. Like I'd seen this before. That couldn't be. My mind, for just a brief instant, cycled back to a couple hours before in the parking lot of Ned's. Are those the same pants? Again, I know how dumb it sounds, and sure, there probably are a bunch of other pairs of pants just like those, but I'm telling you, the pants the lady was washing looked exactly like the ones Lori was wearing. I ended up swallowing this down, though, unable to really think clearly about anything at the moment, far less about some half-baked conspiracy with the old woman at the laundromat. Just before leaving, one of the police officers gave us a number and told us they'd call if they found any leads. That night, Bianca stayed with her folks at her place. She offered for me to come along, but I decided that I'd be better if I just got a hotel room for a few days instead. We agreed to keep in touch about if and when we come back to the apartment. For the next couple of days, time seemed to run together. But like days were both flying by while at the same time moving at a snail's pace. I was, of course, swallowing in grief, barely even able to bring myself out of bed most of the time, and eventually I decided that I needed to spend some time out. I drove around for a couple hours, not really able to decide on where I wanted to go. Finally, I just settled on stopping into Ned's washers. I figured, if anything, maybe talking to old Ned might be able to lighten me up a bit. It looked to be empty again when I pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, though, there she was. The old woman, folding clothes. I began to wonder how long she'd been there, given the place only opened 2 hours ago. Did she camp out by the front door or something? I walked in and I looked around, unable to find Ned anywhere. Ned! Hello? Where are you at? Nothing. Silence. Or at least silence except for the old woman singing. Oh, little bee, why do you fly away, little bee? A family ye may have, but friends miss ye, do you see? Oh, little bee, don't fly away. Far you'll only fall, and alone in the dark you'll stay. This time the words were sung to the tune of You Are My Sunshine. Her voice seemed even softer than before, even sadder, like she just lost someone herself. Hearing this, I couldn't help but approach her. Who is she? I asked softly, putting my hand on her shoulders. Her voice stopped abruptly and she was still. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. A good lass, she replied in her smooth voice, cutting me off. A pretty little lass who's lost her kin. Were you close to her? She shook her head. Nah. But I know someone who was. What happened? Admittedly, part of me felt bad asking that question. I knew it was probably none of my business, but I couldn't help myself for some reason. She was quiet for another minute before speaking up again. Little bee wanted to fly away, far from where her kin lays. And when she does, her wings, they fail her. And she falls. And 'neath the cold waters, she'll lay forever. I actually felt my heart begin to break hearing this. Again, whether it was what she was saying or how she said it, it seemed to resonate with me on a visceral level. At the same time, though, I couldn't help but wonder exactly what she meant by all of this. Little bee? Who the hell was that? What was she wanted to fly away but her wings failed her supposed to mean? I was actually just about to shake it off as the eccentric ramblings of old age when something caught my eye. Beside her was a large bag of clothes, the one she always had with her. Now, however, I saw a hot pink halter top with a skateboarding panda bear on the front. Now, I knew something was up. That was Bianca's halter, the one that I had custom made for her from a website for her birthday last year. And looking closer, I noticed that there was red stain spattered across the front of it. Where did you get this? I demanded, snatching it from the bag. She looked at it, and then to me with an expression of pure sadness. Where did you get this? Did Bianca give it to you? She slowly shook her head. Then where did it come from, huh? Did you steal it? What the hell is all over it? She just turned away, taking the halter from my hands and throwing it into the washer before going back to folding another shirt. Look, if this is a joke, it's not a joke, dear. I take no pleasure in what I do. I wish she didn't see me do it either. I don't wish for anyone to see me while at work. What are you talking about? I was starting to become really irritated really quick. What was this old goat's deal? I, too, used to watch an old woman while she washed. And now here I am, toiling and suffering. All the same. I don't like washing their shroud. But that's what I have to do. I decided before losing my cool with this lady to walk out. On the drive back to the hotel, all I could think about was the old woman's words. None of it making any sense. What does she mean by she didn't like washing the clothes? What'd she mean by she used to watch an old woman while she washed, and now she's forced to do the same? And let's not forget the million-dollar question. Where and how in the name of God did she get Bianca's halter top? That led me further down the rabbit hole, cycling back to Loretta's death. The pants, the ripped, sequin-pocketed pants. Now, I was sure they had to be the same. Of course, it still wasn't adding up. This still didn't make any sense to me. Who the old lady was, what she was talking about, or why, or what she was doing with my friend's clothes. I was about halfway back to the hotel when I got a text from Bianca telling me to meet her back at my apartment. She said that she got confirmation earlier that day that I was good to come back now, and that they had some information regarding Lori's murder. When I pulled up, B was standing outside with two of the officers from before. "We found a possible suspect," one of them said. "Who?" B exclaimed, looking like she was ready to jump out of her skin. The officer then rummaged around his pocket before pulling out a piece of paper. "Witness claimed to see this man with your sister that night. Also claimed to see him bolting out of the room as well." He unfolded the paper, and our faces went as white as a sheet. It was a composite sketch of Loretta's boyfriend. "Oh my God, no!" Bianca cried, covering her mouth in disbelief. "No, it can't be." "You know him?" "Yeah, that's her boyfriend, Samuel Lander. But no, he couldn't have done this. I know him. He wouldn't hurt her." I put my hand around B and brought her close to me. I wanted to comfort her, tell her this was some mistake or something. I mean, I knew Samuel too. The guy wasn't the type to do something like this. Honestly, he was the guy most girls would probably peg as the nice guy. Always showing up to date with flowers, wearing polos and khakis all the time, constantly showering her with compliments as well as telling the corniest jokes, but Lori would always still laugh at them anyway. I didn't want to believe that this was the same guy who just murdered sweet little Lori in cold blood. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling in the back of my head that, in a way, this had somehow been predetermined. The horrid beast's name be Sam, whose mind is dark and foul. Sure enough, the next day, it was in the news. 28-year-old Samuel Lander charged with the murder of girlfriend 26-year-old Loretta Crockett. At the trial, about a week later, he pled guilty to second-degree murder. I remember the way that his face looked when he admitted to killing Loretta. Blank. Empty. When asked why, he replied that it just happened. One moment we're having fun playing rough, the next I'm strangling her on the floor. And then she was dead. In the end, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole. After that, things seemed to slow down again. I returned to the apartment while B decided to just stay at her folks' place. Like I said, this was all a couple of months ago. Now fast forward to 2 weeks ago, where I'd actually managed to forget all about the old woman. Granted, I hadn't been stopping by Ned's either. The whole thing with Loretta seemed to also fade to the back of my mind as well. In short, I guess you could say I moved on. Bianca, on the other hand, not so much. She never came back during that time to the apartment. She never really answered my calls or texts either. I couldn't really blame her for not wanting to come back. At the same time, I was honestly starting to worry about her. That was why when she texted me that Monday out of nowhere, I all but jumped to my phone to respond. "Hey, I wanted to say thank you for being an awesome friend and a great roomie. I'm leaving town next week and flying up to a place in the mountains up north. There's just too many painful memories here now. I'll be by through the week to get my stuff in the apartment and go ahead and give you half of my next year's rent." I won't lie, this was not at all what I was hoping for. What was worse, a distinct chill ran down my spine. Flying? She said she was flying. That's when the song slowly came back to me, prickling through my brain. "Oh, little bee, don't fly away. Far you'll only fall, and alone in the dark you'll stay." Is this what she meant? What the old woman meant? That Bianca was gonna die, like how she somehow knew Lori would. This circulated through my head all the weeks while B came and packed up her stuff. Once or twice because of this, I tried to persuade her to reconsider her decision. It was no good, though, and it's not like I couldn't feel where she was coming from either. And plus, how was I supposed to explain why I didn't feel comfortable with her flying? In the end, she agreed to at least let me drive her to the airport. At least say goodbye between two friends. "Promise you'll keep in touch, okay?" I said, anxiety seeping into my voice. She said, "Okay," before turning and heading for the terminal. With nothing else I could do, I headed back to my car. Deep inside, I was silently hoping that something would happen, the flight would be cancelled, or something. She texted me a few hours later after I'd returned home, saying they'd taken off. The next 2 days after that, things seemed to be fine, with B texting me at least once to let me know everything was still okay. Because of this, I finally was starting to relax again. Maybe the old woman was just spouting crazy stuff all along. Maybe Bianca will be okay after all. Of course, that third day came and went without a single word from her. After being as patient as I could, trying to tell myself that she must be too high up to get any reception, I began flooding her with calls and texts. None of these were met with a reply. That's when panic set in. I tried calling her folks to see if they'd heard from her, but they said that she hadn't spoken to them since the day she left with me for the airport. I asked if they'd give her a call, and they did. With no response. I was freaking out now. I didn't eat or sleep or even go to the bathroom. I was glued to my phone, praying harder than ever that Bianca would text me saying she was okay. It was late that night, around 12:30 a.m., that a breaking news broadcast came on the TV. Catawba County Airlines Flight 341 malfunctions and disappears over Atlantic. My heart stopped. My blood froze solid. 341? No. That isn't... But it was. Remembering seeing the number on the side of the plane, it was Bianca's flight. I felt dizzy and just barely made it to the bathroom to throw up. It happened. It happened just like Lori's death happened, exactly how the old woman said that it would. The memorial was that past Sunday, 4 days ago. I didn't go. I couldn't go. I was so overcome with fear, confusion, and all-around sheer paranoia that I barely would even leave my bed. It was only this afternoon, unable to put up with the smell of my dirty clothes anymore, that I finally left the house. I thought at first to just suck it up, start using the downstairs washer, but of course, they were all full with people lining up all the way up to the stairs waiting. I crossed my fingers on the way to Ned's, hoping the old woman wouldn't be there. Again, just my luck. There she was. When I went in, I tried my best to avoid looking at her. Ned offered his condolences and talked to me for a while, which helped ease my nerves at least a little at first, but when he had to run to the bathroom, everything was quiet again. Except for the old woman's singing. When I looked to her this time, she was looking right at me with tears in her eyes, and she began singing, this time to a similar tune. Oh, Rita dear, ye were a sweetheart. Oh, Rita dear. My eyes went wide. That was my name. I briefly glimpsed in her hands was the very same t-shirt I wore the last time that I was there, covered in red stains, like with B's halter top, right as she was throwing it into the washer, and began singing again. I turned and all but threw myself out the door and into my car. From there, I made a beeline back to the apartment, where I am now, buried like a little kid under my blankets. I'm scared. I can't leave my house. I'm next. What's gonna happen? Am I gonna die in a car crash? Is someone gonna murder me like with Loretta? At this point, I'm probably gonna die of a heart attack or something. I don't know. But she does. I don't know how, but she knows. And somehow, she sees when and how you and I will die. And now I see it too. I see it. And I wish, more than anything, now, that I didn't. Shattered and Splintered is a charity horror anthology of 20 terrifying tales from the cracks that lie between perception and reality. Featuring stories from Stephen Graham Jones, Gwendolyn Christie, Eric LaRocca, Vincent V. Cava, Gemma Amor, Laurel Hightower, Gabino Iglesias, and many more. Grab a copy today, available at aeapress.com and on Amazon. All proceeds benefit the Glen Haven Area Volunteer Fire Department near Estes Park. Maybe the head was fake. It was the only explanation that made sense. Ellen was a kindergarten teacher, for Christ's sake. One who volunteered at a pet shelter taking care of dogs and cats that were too ugly to adopt. On their first date, she had shown Mike pictures of the summer that she spent abroad in Guatemala, building homes for the poor and teaching literacy to villagers. It wasn't even one of those kooky religious missions either. She just genuinely wanted to help people. In the 3 weeks Mike had known her, he had never heard Ellen cuss, complain, or utter a snide remark about anyone. And that includes the jack-off whose phone kept going off in the movie theater during their date earlier that night. Ellen was a good person. Perhaps the sweetest, kindest, most understanding person he knew. So the sheer, unmitigated mind fuck he was currently experiencing was understandable after he opened the fridge and found himself staring directly into the eyes of a severed human head. This not head, which was how Mike was now thinking of it in an effort to preserve his sanity, was positioned upright from the stump of its neck atop a ceramic serving dish that read, "Live, Laugh, Love," in a flowery cursive font. Its bushy gray beard trailed down the shelf below and into a matching ceramic bowl, where it mingled with what looked to be leftover pasta carbonara, perhaps a few days old. The face had 2 piercings, one being a chunky brass hoop that hung from the nose's septum like a bull ring. The other was a gaudy gold hunk of jewelry encrusted in faux diamonds that dangled from the left earlobe and spelled out "stud muffin" in big bulky letters. It was an ugly knothead, which Mike thought was ironic considering the earring, though not nearly as ironic as the fact that he had found it in the refrigerator of a woman he had just spent the last 37 minutes making hot, steamy love to. He cursed himself. If only he hadn't gone all out during sex, he could still be lying naked in bed with the most beautiful woman he'd ever known, face buried in her bountiful bosom, blissfully unaware of the horror sitting between the carton of oat milk and tub of Miracle Whip on the second shelf of her refrigerator. But no. He just had to help himself to a bottle of water, rehydrate and replenish for round 2, he thought. What a mistake. Now he was standing in her kitchen, Donald ducking it in nothing but an Aerosmith t-shirt, and debating whether or not he should go back to grab his pants or just run screaming from the apartment, fanny glistening in the moonlight. "There you are. I thought I lost you." Mike whirled around to see Ellen behind him, spouting a devilish grin. She was sexier than ever in a black lace nightie that fit so snugly around the curves of her body, it might as well have been painted on. She hadn't taken the time to tame her bedhead, but that didn't matter at all. In fact, it made her even more seductive. Like an exotic jungle animal in heat that had just slinked out of a bush and was ready to pounce. Her plump red lips were so inviting that Mike almost leaned in to kiss them, but then he remembered the severed head in her fridge, and he felt his libido fizzle out. "Oh, are you hungry?" she asked. "No, I'm fine." Actually, he had been famished just a few minutes ago, but the head had put a damper on his appetite. "It's just that I got a little distracted, because of the head in your fridge." Ellen's eyes shot open. "Why? What's wrong with it?" She pushed past Mike and started examining the head, first opening the eyes with her fingers like an optometrist getting ready to dilate them, then one by one combing her way through the mouth, nostril, and ears. Mike cleared his throat, hoping to recapture Ellen's attention from whatever it was she was doing. "It's a head? That's what's wrong with it," he said, and then attempted to bring the moment back down to earth. "Is it real?" "What do you mean? Are you asking me if you're imagining a head in my fridge? Don't worry, Mike, you aren't experiencing a psychotic episode. I'm aware the head in your fridge isn't a psychotic hallucination. I'm asking you if it's an actual human head or if it's like a cake or something." Ellen raised an eyebrow at the question. She was gawking at him as if he had asked the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. Her face was so perplexed and bemused by what he had just said that Mike couldn't help but shrink a little. Why would I have a head-shaped cake in my fridge? She started laughing. Great. Now he had to double down and defend his pride. I don't know. I've seen those crazy baking shows on TV. People can make cakes look like anything these days. Yeah, but a head? She wiped a tear from her cheek. Why wouldn't I bake a cake that looked like the Empire State Building or a rocket ship, or at least one that looked like the head of a famous person? I don't have an answer for that, Ellen, but we're kind of getting away from the main point here. If that isn't a head-shaped cake in your fridge, then you're telling me it's an actual severed human head? Well, yeah. It's a lot simpler than the whole cake thing, don't you think? She folded her arms over her chest, and for a moment there was only silence in the kitchen as both parties were relieved that, at the very least, the cake conversation had run its course. This relief was only fleeting, though, as it opened up a far bigger problem that now needed to be addressed. Why do you have a human head in your fridge? Mike blurted out. To keep it cold, duh. Have you ever smelled a human head after it goes bad? That just makes me think that this isn't your first head. Ellen snorted. I've had a few. Mike took a deep exhale and massaged his temples. He was starting to feel a migraine building behind his eyes. To make things worse, Ellen was making a joke out of the whole head thing. He mustered the most sober tone he could in order to steer the discussion into a more dignified direction, which was already a challenge since he wasn't wearing pants. You're obviously not taking this very seriously, he said. What are you doing with a human head in your fridge? Ellen placed her hand on her hip and grunted. She was tired of the conversation and just wanted to get back to cuddling. I'm going to eat the head, Mike. Like with a knife and fork? I don't even use chopsticks when I eat Chinese. She broached a flirty, dizzy smile and twirled her hair on her finger. I'm way too clumsy. When you say Chinese, are you talking about that takeout place around the corner, or... I mean chow mein, pot stickers, mushu chicken, and no, before you ask, I've never eaten a Chinese head. They're usually white dudes like this one. But I don't want you to think I have a preference or anything. I'm an equal opportunity kind of girl. Mike stared at Ellen, dumbfounded for what felt like eons. The gorgeous, sweet woman, whom he had fallen so hard for over the past few weeks, had just admitted to him that she ate human heads. He uttered his next question, unsure if he wanted to hear the answer. Whose head is in the fridge, Ellen? I don't know. I don't source my heads. Do you source your eggs, Mr. Ethical Consumption? For your information, I do source my eggs. I only buy from free-range chicken farms, but that's besides the point. Which is that my girlfriend has a human head in her fridge. She's planning on eating it, and she can't even tell me where it came from. Whoa. Slow down a second. Ellen's smile had vanished. Girlfriend? Dude, we just had sex for the first time. Don't you think you're taking things a little fast? Mike had to admit that those words stung a bit. Normally, he would have been more embarrassed by her reaction, but the sight of the severed head in Ellen's fridge helped to push back any feelings of guilt or shame that he might have been harboring. Okay, that's a discussion for another time, he said. Kind of an important one, don't you think? Sure. Maybe I jumped the gun on the whole girlfriend thing. I'm sorry. I thought you liked me. She approached him carefully, feeling him out at first, then wrapping her arms around his waist. I like you a whole lot, Mike. She pressed herself close to him and began to rub his back. He could smell the shampoo on her hair and briefly considered kissing her again. And I like you, he replied. Or, well, I thought I did, but then I found a severed head in your refrigerator, and you told me you're planning on eating it. She released the hug and started pouting. It seemed as if she was on the verge of tears. And that's a deal breaker to you? Her voice was cracking. I would say so! You can't just go around killing people and eating their heads! Who said I killed him? I told you I don't even know whose head it is. Do you think I just point a guy out to my head people and say, he looks delicious, decapitate him, I'll eat his head? You have head people? Well, yeah. It's not like they sell heads at Whole Foods. And even if they did, they'd probably be overpriced. He couldn't argue that point. I mean, in a parallel fucked up universe where Whole Foods sold human heads, he figured they'd slap an all-natural sticker on the forehead and mark them up 15% higher than other supermarket food chains. You don't want to eat my head, do you? Ellen laughed. I just had sex with you. Why would I want to eat your head? The female praying mantis eats the head of males that it mates with. Ellen began mimicking a praying mantis, pecking at Mike's chest with her fingers as if they were pinchers. Buzz, buzz, I'm Madam Mantis. I'm going to eat your head, Mike. The praying mantis doesn't make a buzzing sound. They hiss. Ellen dropped the charade. Her ploy to lighten the mood was not working. You're really upset about this? She asked. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm uncomfortable with the whole cannibalism? Okay, I guess it's technically cannibalism, sure. But it's not like I eat the rest of the body, it's just the heads, understand? I'm not some weirdo sauteing nipples or slow roasting peckers in my crock pot. That doesn't make it any better. What if he was a family man? What if there's some little kid out there sitting in a parking lot waiting for his dad to come pick him up from ball practice and you have his head in the fridge? Ellen glanced at the head, then back to Mike. Oh, come on, you really think Stud Muffin over there was a family man? I mean, he could have been. He could have cured cancer. And he could have been a drug dealer or a serial killer. He could have been one of those people that comes into a restaurant 5 minutes before closing and demands to be seated. Do these thoughts go through your head when you're chowing down a chicken sandwich? Do you think, oh my God, I might be eating chicken Jesus right now? Mike waved the analogy away. That man is dead, and you're eating his head. That's wrong, period. That's more than wrong. It's... His face twisted into a sneer. Disgusting! Disgusting? I'll have you know that not only are heads delicious, but they're a lot more nutritious than most of the other crud people shove down their gullets. You eat fast food, right? I mean, yeah, but do you have any idea how much shit is in a hamburger patty? I'm talking literal cow shit, Mike. There are laws about how much cow shit can be in a hamburger patty, and that quantity is greater than 0. Do you know how much cow shit is in a human head? 0. There is a grand total sum of 0 cow shit in a human head. Now tell me, what's more disgusting? Tears were flowing now. Ellen was getting flustered. Head or no head, guilt was creeping its way through Mike's consciousness. He tried to put his arm around her, but she shrugged him off. People always think I'm a freak when they find out I eat heads. Isn't there someone out there who can just accept me for my dietary choices? It was then they heard a scream. It was a terrible, guttural scream. For a moment, Mike thought that it sounded as if an evil, demonic goat had somehow crept up from the bowels of hell, snuck into Ellen's fridge while they were arguing, and was now announcing his presence by unleashing upon them a tirade of torturous, whooping death cries. As frightening and ghastly as the scenario was, Mike would have welcomed it over what he realized was actually taking place. When his eyes followed the abhorrent howls, it became clear that Baphomet had not suddenly materialized inside of Ellen's refrigerator. Neither had Black Phillip or Master Leonard, for that matter. There was, however, the severed head. It was still sitting on the shelf like a bloated, saggy turkey carcass, but much to Mike's dismay, it now appeared to be screaming. "Oh, crud!" Ellen shouted. She shut the door, which only managed to muffle the screams a little bit. "The head is alive?" Mike said. "No, I mean, I don't know," Ellen responded. "How could it be?" "You tell me! You're the head expert. Has this ever happened to you before?" "Of course not. And if it did, I would definitely hire new head people." She leaned her weight against the door as though she was worried the head would soon grow limbs and try to force itself out, a concern they both would have considered absurd before the screaming had begun. How is it doing that?" Mike asked. "Does it even have vocal cords?" Ellen shrugged. "This is a new experience for me, too." They waited, shoulders braced against the refrigerator door, listening to the severed head wail on and on for minutes until, mercifully, the screaming started to subside. An uncanny hush that fell over the kitchen. Unsure of what to do next, they shot each other a pair of nervous glances. "Should we look inside?" Mike asked. Ellen didn't want to open the door. Instead, she would have liked to chain it shut, drive the fridge to the nearest bridge, dump it in the river, and forget the whole incident ever happened. This, of course, was an unrealistic plan, and she knew it. There was no way she'd be able to strap the massive refrigerator to the top of her tiny hatchback, and even if she could, what would she say to the cops if they pulled her over for speeding and the head started screaming again? "I'm sorry, officer. I really should have thrown that pasta carbonara out last week when I noticed it started getting moldy." She decided to follow Mike's lead on this one. The two prepared for whatever unholy hell spawn was waiting for them inside the fridge by arming themselves with kitchen utensils. Once sufficiently equipped, they wrapped their fingers around the door handle and nodded to each other in tandem. "On three," Mike said, raising a spatula over his head with his free hand, as though it were a medieval mace. "1, 2, Ellen said, her voice cracking half a dozen times over the course of a single syllable. 3. They flung the door open and let out a fierce shout, ready to do battle with the enemy lurking inside, but the sight they were greeted with disarmed them immediately, and within moments their war cries had dwindled to little more than puzzled stares, head-scratching, and incoherent murmurs. There before them was the head. He was gazing up from its shelf, very much alive and smiling cordially. "Hey," it said. They continued to stare at the head, eyes wide and mouths agape, until Ellen summoned the strength to answer it. "Hey," she said back. "Hey," Mike repeated. "Do you guys think you can lend me a hand?" asked the head. "Cold in here. I'd say I'm freezing my ass off, but as you can see, I don't have one." Mike and Ellen each grabbed a side of the serving dish, lifting it from the fridge, then placing it down on the kitchen counter beside the stove. "Thanks," said the head. "Sorry about the screaming. I just snapped back into consciousness. It was kind of a gnarly experience. Hope it didn't freak you out too much." "So, are you a magic head or something?" Mike asked. "Magic how? Are you asking if I grant wishes?" "Well, do you?" "I don't think so," said the head. "But if I did, I'd ask you to wish for some pants. Kind of lame that the first thing I have to see after coming back to life is your ding-a-ling flopping around." "What's your name?" asked Ellen. "Bud." The head shot her a wink. "But you can call me Stud Muffin." "I have a question, Stud Muffin," said Mike. "You can't call me that," said the head. "Just the babe over there." "Sorry. Bud? Are you okay?" Bud, the head, closed his eyes to ponder the question. "Yeah, I guess so. Aside from the waking up and disembodied head thing." "Do you need to go to the hospital?" asked Ellen. "I don't think there's much doctors can do for me," answered the head. "Maybe they could give you a new robot body," said Mike. Bud laughed so hard at the suggestion, he began wobbling on his plate, almost tipping over. "Robot body? What kind of fantasy world are you living in? That's ridiculous." "As ridiculous as a talking head?" Mike snapped. He let out a groan. Things had been spiraling out of control before the head demonstrated consciousness. Now the entire world had been flipped upside down. "What's wrong, Mike?" Ellen moved in close and tried to give him a hug, but he placed a hand on her chest to stop her. He took a step back to put some distance between them. 10 minutes ago, nothing was wrong," he grumbled. "I was perfectly happy and horny. And then I found out you enjoy eating human heads. And now I'm talking to one. On your kitchen counter." "Oh, snap," said Bud. "You were going to eat me?" "In my defense, I thought you were dead," said Ellen. "Yeah, that's fair," said Bud. How is that fair?" shouted Mike. "I'm sensing some trouble in paradise over here." If Bud had hands, he would have used them to gesture towards Mike and Ellen as he said that, but he didn't, so instead he flicked his tongue at them, which came off as more obscene than intended. Nobody commented on it, but he could tell everyone in the room thought it was weird, so he made a mental note not to do it again. "Would you guys like some privacy?" "No, you should hear this too," said Mike. "Ellen, when I met you, you were the girl of my dreams. You were kind, you were sweet, you were beautiful. But I guess it was too good to be true. Now, I'm not sure what to think of you. Ellen's shoulders dropped. I think the world of you, Mike. You're funny, you're charming, attentive. Hell, you're the first guy to ever make me climax. Oh, boy! Cried the head. Ellen disregarded Bud's outburst and continued. I'm really into you, but I can't change who I am. If you can't accept a partner who eats heads, then maybe we shouldn't see each other anymore. You really think I'm funny? Asked Mike. I'm having a hard time believing that too, said Bud. Shut up, said Mike. The head ignored his request. Look, I'm just a head, so what do I know? But it sounds like you two are crazy for each other. Relationships are about compromise, Mike. If you're not willing to accept your partner's faults, you're never going to find someone to be happy with. Maybe you're right, said Mike. And Ellen, continued the head. He almost gestured to her with his tongue again, but decided against it at the last second. You have to be upfront with your partner, even if you're afraid you might scare him away. For example, you eating heads is probably something you should have included on your dating profile. Can't blame Mike for being shocked about it. You're right, said Ellen. Mike, I should have told you there was a severed head in my fridge before I invited you over. And I should have at least heard you out before I got so judgmental about it, Mike said. They held each other in a long embrace, and for the first time since Mike had found the head, it didn't feel awkward. It felt right. This is beautiful, said the head. Mike gave Ellen a kiss. Maybe we can make this work, he said. Really? Her eyes lit up like sapphires. She squeezed Mike so hard he thought she might crack his ribs. Even though I eat heads? Even though you eat heads, Mike said. I'm really happy for you guys, said Bud. If I had arms, I'd get in on this hug too. Provided Mike put some pants on. So, Mike said to Ellen, what did they taste like? You mean the heads? It depends on how you cook them. I whipped up a nice balsamic glaze for Bud. It's kind of my specialty. Too bad it has to go to waste, said Bud from the counter. That does sound good, Mike said. Maybe I should try it sometime. Ellen was beaming. If you're serious, I'll call my head guy tomorrow. Why wait? Said Mike. I mean, you've already gone and prepped everything. Why don't we eat now? Do you see another head in the fridge? Asked Bud. No, but I see a perfectly good one on the counter. Mike grinned. Oh, Mike. I don't know. Ellen was beginning to waffle. The heads I cook are already dead. I'm not sure if I could kill a living, breathing thing. He doesn't have lungs, so he's already not breathing, Mike responded. Besides, he's just a head. What quality of life could he possibly have like that? We'd be doing him a service. Hey, said Bud, I'm not just some post-sex midnight snack. Screw it, said Ellen. I'm kind of hungry too. Let's do it. Ellen switched on the oven and set it to preheat, then pulled a roasting pan out of the pantry. You're not really thinking about cooking me, are you? Asked Bud. The lovers moved in unison, as if performing a waltz inside Ellen's little kitchen, grabbing pots and various spices from the pantry and placing them on the counter beside Bud. Every now and then they would stop, only long enough to plant a kiss on their partner or to season the head, despite its protests. Please! Bud begged, his mouth full of spices and garlic cloves. Don't eat me! The oven chimed, signaling it was ready. Ellen reached into the fridge and pulled out her special glaze and started pouring it over Bud, taking care to saturate every inch of him. That does smell really good, said Mike. He patted Ellen on the butt. Promise it'll taste good too. She smiled. Not as good as you. Mike and Ellen smooched as she poured the last of her special glaze over Bud. Oh, it's going up my nose, pleaded the head. She finished up and opened the oven door. Bud began crying when he felt the first wave of heat hit him in the face, but the lovebirds were too caught up in each other's gaze to pay him any mind. Together they lifted the roasting pan off the counter, slid it inside the oven, and closed the door. The head started screaming again, and this time, it was from the agony rather than fear. Now I'll just set the timer for 45 minutes, and we'll be ready to eat, Ellen said. Great. What should we do till then? Mike asked. Oh, I've got an idea. Ellen spun around and slinked towards the bedroom. When she got to the doorway, she twisted back towards Mike and with her finger motioned for him to follow before disappearing into the dimly lit room. Time for round 2, Mike said. Ah! Bud said. Mike opened the fridge and grabbed 2 bottles of water this time, then hurried off to fulfill his erotic desires. The couple made love. It was fervent and sensual, and as they pleasured each other, their lustful moans carried through the air. So loud were their cries of passion that they could be heard from the kitchen, drowning out even the screams of Bud, whose skin was slowly blistering off of his face. Are you sure there's buried treasure here?
Yeah, I've heard strange tales about this place. Ghosts and zombies and shit.
I rolled my eyes as a small skipper boat we were on slid up against the sands of the island. It's not a treasure map, Jack. There won't be a dotted line leading to an X that marks the spot, I told him, as I surveyed the encroaching jungle. It was exactly like my friend Will had described it. It was haunting, how still the foliage was. Not even a sign of wildlife could be seen. Maybe the rumors of there being something supernatural on this island were true.
Well, that ain't necessarily wrong, though. I mean, if there is treasure here, it's not exactly going to be scattered about, Jack commented as he lit a cigarette and paid our guide. When should I return to pick you up? The Egyptian man asked. His eyes betrayed his fear of the island, a clear danger that he was sure existed just beyond this line of trees. He was anxious to leave. Circle back near dinner time. We should be ready to go by then, Jack decided.
You really think that we could find something in just 12 short hours? Patsy asked as she took out her camera. She was already so eager to capture everything on film. As we tramped through the overgrowth, it was beginning to look like there wouldn't be much to see, though. According to Will, the crash site was near the North Cliff, I said, as I grabbed the heavier gear that we would need for the eventual dive. I knew my friends were likely expecting to find gold doubloons or medallions, but my interest was in antiques of a different kind. Just for clarity, remind me again what you said. The last member of our party, Annie, insisted. If you weren't so busy wasting time making out on the trip over here, Jack gave me the stink eye, and I sighed, rehashing all the details that I felt were necessary. Okay, so a few years back, Will and his mates came out here on spring break. So they wanted to get away from the hustle and the bustle of the main island, just chill with nature and shit, right? Anyway, while they were here, they went for a few swims, and they stumbled across an old World War I bomber. He was able to dredge up a few cool things from the wreck before they returned to land, I told them.
What exactly could an old aircraft have that we could sell? Jack asked.
I pushed the jungle overgrowth aside and kept walking towards the North Cliff. I explained it to them. These were probably the first of their kind. The findings of these artifacts could even reshape history of the time. They'd be priceless. If we could find them, that is. What about the rumors, though? Why is it called Screaming Island? Annie asked. Probably just to scare off any tourists. This place has been abandoned for a while, so I wouldn't be too surprised if a few legends came from it, I responded.
Maybe there are howler monkeys somewhere inland, Jack joked.
I have enough oxygen for about 4 hours of diving, Patsy said as we got to a clearing. All of us paused for a short, tangible moment as we came across a pile of human skulls. It was jarring and shocking, and immediately Annie spoke what was on everyone's mind. Mark? I thought you said this place was deserted.
Well, now we know why it's creepy here, Jack muttered.
I swallowed a gulp of air and continued to push through the next trail. That's what Will told me. And that 2 years ago. Maybe it changed since then? Maybe someone came to the island.
That looked like more than 2 years' worth of skeletal remains, Jack snapped, grabbing my shoulder and shoving me against a tree. What ain't you telling us? You keep mentioning you heard this story from Will. Well, what about his mates? Why ain't any of them coming forward with stories of treasure?
I didn't know what to say, except that it was pointless to lie to them now. I'm not really sure what happened to them.
Will never talked about that, but it's not like he was in the right frame of mind. Patsy's eyes sparkled with that sudden realization. Wait a tick, are you talking about William Carter? The guy that tried to commit suicide last year? I dated him sophomore fall semester. Yeah, that's him, I said, diverting my eyes. Jack was clearly more suspicious now than ever. So, we were following the words of a stupid, crazy person that offed themselves? Why did he try to commit suicide? Can we walk and talk? I don't like staying near that, Annie commented as she pointed back towards the pile of bones. We agreed to that. But Jack kept a close eye on me as we arrived at the cliffside, where it looked like some makeshift cabin had once stood. It was clear from the ashes on the ground that it had also recently been burnt down, probably within the last few months, I realized as I checked the perimeter. Something doesn't feel right about this besides the obvious, Patsy said nervously. Let's not overstay our welcome, okay? A lot of this info I got is probably old. So why don't we just dive, grab the goods, and just hang out at the shore until Abdul shows back up and takes us to the mainland, I suggested. Suits me just fine. But don't think for a second I'm letting you off the hook about Will, Jack said as he stripped down to get ready for the dive. We'd only brought enough gear for 2 people, and since he and I were the top swimmers from college, it made sense that we would go down. In the meantime, I told the girls to stay watch and tug on the line if there was a problem. I prayed that my growing tension about the island was wrong and that we could find the wreck quickly and leave. We swam about to a trench that was about 2 kilometers from the cliffs, and chose that as the place to dive. I instructed Jack to stay near me in case of sudden riptide, and the 2 of us soon found ourselves in a pocket of the reef that looked like it might be the perfect spot for debris to be scattered in. To my surprise, though, it looked like it was an underground tunnel of some kind carved completely into the trench. The dive light on my scuba helmet barely penetrated the tunnel a few meters, and from there it was complete darkness. For some reason, though, I felt compelled to swim deeper. The ocean seemed to be calling me to search. Jack was at my side, motioning for us to go back, but something told me that a find bigger than any ruined aircraft was below. This was going to be groundbreaking. I just knew it. Soon we found ourselves swimming up into what I soon realized was a chasm of some kind with an air pocket. You could even make out a distinct glow from the cavern walls. Something was hidden here, beneath the island. As we came up, I found myself staring at some kind of ancient wall. The carvings on it looked far more prehistoric than I imagined possible for this area, and it immediately sent images of the legends of Atlantis running through my mind. Jack took off his helmet and rubbed his eyes. I hate when they pop like that. You must be pretty far down. Don't see any sunlight anywhere, he commented as he checked around the exterior of the wall. Who knew when the last humans had stood here, I thought to myself. The wall seemed to stretch for miles. Dark and untouched. Foreboding. A strange, eerie sense of unease began to creep along my neck as we found an entrance to the other side, deeper into the labyrinth. A voice telling me that I should wonder. Was this wall meant to keep us out? Or keep something within? What had this place been built for? The deeper we went, the more treacherous the path became. It wasn't exactly designed for people. The shapes were too oblong and nonsensical. It felt as though lightning had crossed through the stone and pushed its way into the crevices, even though it was clearly manufactured this way, as if not meant for humans at all. Some strange, unholy abomination made these, I thought, as we arrived at a massive chamber that reminded me of a cemetery. There were at least 20 oval-shaped coffins, standing in a row in front of us. Each of them placed in such a pattern to indicate their place in the hierarchy of this ancient society, or so it seemed. Jack whispered softly and took one of the lids off without even hesitating. "What are you doing? That stuff could have some 10,000-year-old disease," I shouted. "Don't be such a wuss, Mark. Forget the aircraft. This is where the money will be. Museums will pay through their asses for a fortune like this," Could even reshape what we think about history, he said, as he reached into the cylinder and took out a strange black stone. It looked like it was made of pure marble. This feels like a bad idea. Something about this place reminds me of Will's trip. He said that he ran into trouble, that there were forces here that we couldn't understand. Maybe we should head back, I suggested. Not until we grab a few of these, he insisted, taking a few of the stone urns and then following me towards the entrance. All the while, it felt like we were being watched. As we made it to the air pocket where we would need to dive again, I heard a strange whistling noise and turned back towards the tunnel instinctively. There was something there. It was larger than a normal human and had eyes that covered its body. It looked like it had formed out of the shadows themselves. At first I thought that I was seeing things, and then the monster slid against the wall the way a blob of jelly might. I grabbed Jack to look, but in that split second the creature had vanished. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped. I saw... I'm not sure what I saw, I admitted. "Don't go crazy on me down here. Won't hesitate to drop your ass," my friend told me as he put his helmet back on and placed the black stones in his satchel. I heard the whistling again, but this time I didn't look back. We just need to leave as soon as possible, I told myself. The tiny rocks shimmered with more intensity as they hit the water, and I swam behind him, watching as it seemed like they were beginning to erode in the deep waters. As we got back towards the trench, I realized that that wasn't what was happening at all. The rocks weren't dissolving. The urns were hatching. Some strange black tendrils were moving out of his satchel and wrapping around Jack's leg as I swam and I tried to catch his attention, but it was already too late. Somehow this formless blob was expanding at a rapid rate and grabbing a hold of his appendages, making him sink the way a true stone would. I tried to grab a hold of him, but the creature was coiling into his skin tighter and tighter as he sank into the depths, and I knew I wouldn't have the power or the time. I watched as his eyes bulged and he screamed in the deep. Swarmed by the monsters and taken to their lair. Instead, I said a silent prayer and I crashed back towards the surface, calling out to my friends for help. The cliffside was silent. Even as I tugged urgently on the rope, Annie and Patsy, would they be alive when I got there? I frantically started to climb up, worried that some other unholy terror might have attacked them. As I made it to the ridge, I caught my breath and I saw a group of natives standing there with spears drawn. My friends were on the ground, trembling and trying to surrender. It was clear that one of the tribal warriors had already injured Annie with a bloody knee. There were at least 12 of them, all covering their bodies in a strange-smelling copper paint, with war designs and fearful monsters that reminded me of the creature that had just swallowed up Jack. "Please don't hurt them," I tried to say, but it was about as useless as talking to a wall. A language barrier was there, and the natives were only interested in seeing us be punished. So they grabbed me by the hair and tossed me into the center of their attack ring, a female group of musicians clamoring on the drums nearby as I was forced to make the decision to surrender as well. It was the only chance I had to determine if we could escape and possibly get out of here alive. One of the islanders shoved me to the ground, another jabbed me with a pike. There was a bit of commotion amongst them as I began to bleed. As I looked up at our captors and got a better view of them, I started to understand why they were amazed by seeing us. Beneath the war paint, it was clear the natives were sickly. Their skin a grayish green that was tight to their skin. Worse still, against the sides of their face, I saw long gills that moved up and down as they breathed, and fish-like eyes. These people had been separated from society for so long, they didn't even resemble humans anymore. They pushed us towards the jungle, motioning for us to listen or face more brutal treatment, and Patsy gave me a foul look. "I thought you said the island was deserted." "It's like I told you before. It's been a few years, maybe something's changed since then," I remarked. "Bullshit, Mark! And where's Jack? What did you do to him?" she snapped. One native became angry at her heightened voice and shoved her again. I whispered, "Maybe we can talk about all of this
and we get out of this mess alive. Soon we found ourselves at a very simplistic settlement. It was made of the same materials we saw in the cabin, but clearly was only made maybe a year ago. We also saw more skulls scattered about, what looked like a crossover between a throne and an altar. And the natives began to chant as they tied us up and forced us on the ground. Everything about their behavior and demeanor told me that we were about to be killed. "Any bright ideas?" Annie whispered. I was watching all of them, trying to figure out if there was any real chance they might be reasoned with. Then from the front of the altar, I saw a face that sent a shock down my body. "Will?" Patsy screamed in surprise as her old boyfriend moved towards us, flaunting his strange bone jewelry like a king. "You're dead. I saw you jump at the school," she whispered as he stood right over the top of her. Of course I was. Before I came to this island, I was dead. To the whole world, he whispered. He seemed to be looking at us with amusement and a bit of surprise. "I honestly never thought you of all people would come here. My suicide was meant to stop you, keep you away. I didn't think you'd let greed cloud your judgment," Will said as he told the natives to pull us up to our feet. "You came here searching for treasure, and found something much more dangerous, didn't you?" he said with a sparkle in his eye as he looked towards me. He barked another order, and a few natives came forward with what looked like a tomahawk. "You've desecrated these people's holy landmark. For that, I'm afraid you're going to need to pay a price," he said. I was still baffled by the strangeness of our friend being alive, but before I even knew what was happening, one of the natives was holding my arm still and prepared to chop off my hand. You don't understand. It was Jack. He's the one that took those stones. I tried to stop him. I knew something was wrong with him, and then something under the water attacked him," I said desperately. A few other natives closed in to watch this strange and sinister ritual, each of them holding a different tool or instrument I was sure would add to the torture. "Your honesty is refreshing, but you're just like all the others. Couldn't steer clear from the call of gold, and for that, you deserve this." "You deserve this!" Will shouted, and then motioned for the natives to enact his orders. In one quick swoop, the tomahawk came down and smashed at my wrist, cutting at the bone. Since my arm was not resting on anything, the force of the impact was greater than I was ready for, and it sent me immediately into shock, but Will didn't even flinch when he heard my guttural screams. He ordered the natives to slam the weapon against my arm again and again, severing the hand from my wrist until only bits of sinew and flesh could keep it together. Immediately, the native woman poured a fine coppery water on the wound, cauterizing it the way a laser might in surgery. It burned, but the shock of the initial pain had caused me to go completely numb. To my side, I heard Annie and Patsy screaming and crying, trying their best not to lose their minds as they imagined their own fate at the hands of our former friend. Will took my severed hand and showed it to all the natives in triumph. They cheered, and he turned the hand over to let blood drain out, forcing me to have it drip on my face. "Let the truth flow into your veins, Mark. Open your eyes. See the dark reality of the world around us," he said as the natives forced my eyes open and the disgusting bodily fluids clouded my vision. It burned, perhaps even worse than the amputation, and I cried for him to stop. Then they pushed me back to the sands and took the hand towards their nearest bone pile, tossing it on top and lighting it on fire. I stood there, still transfixed at the reality of losing my hand and numb to the world when I heard the roar of the water and looked towards the horizon. Something is coming up. Was it the same creature that attacked Jack? Immediately the natives dispersed like cockroaches, and I grabbed at the girls to hide even as Will lost his focus. He couldn't control their fear. And apparently the amputation of my hand had been some sort of sacrifice that was meant to appease this blood beast. We watched as Will approached the faceless creature, its formless body shrieking violently and towering 2 feet above his head, opening its maw and spewing toxic acid into his flesh. Now it made sense how these people had lost their sense of humanity. They worshipped monsters. And as I watched, Will got flayed alive like some dead cattle, I realized it was their fervent desire to emulate these atrocious beasts. With his face peeling off and his body being cut to ribbons by the monster, our old friend faced us. I'm actually thankful you came, so you could be granted the immortality I have. I had to leave the life I knew for this, but it was worth it. You'll see that the infinite wisdom they offer will have you strip off your humanity, too, Will said. His voice was shaking as he was attacked over and over. He was offering himself as penance for our crimes, confident the beast would resurrect him to a higher form of life. I took the opportunity as a chance to run for the coast. The girls followed behind as we heard screams from the natives, but nothing could deter us from trying to escape. We made it to the shore where our guide was supposed to be waiting for us, and I felt a gut-wrenching twist in my stomach as I saw the poor man on the sands torn apart like a beached whale. The creature had found him before we had, and he screamed again, and then I heard Will whisper an offer of freedom. One of you must return to the world and tell them of this place. Tell them the danger so that they too will one day be foolish enough to come to our shores. He snarled as his organs began to grow back within his collapsing body. He reminded me of a zombie being powered only by the will of the mindless creature that was eager for more victims. We can pilot the boat. Come on, Annie insisted. Patsy hesitated for a moment, and it was that hesitation that killed her. A long, shallow hand from under the sand grabbed her legs and started to pull her as Will pushed the boat out to shore. There's nowhere you can run from this, Will screamed as Annie and I climbed into the boat. We tried desperately to reach for Patsy as she was swallowed by the undead monsters under the beach, but it was too late. It was a miracle we made it off the beach. We were pushed towards the open water. I activated the boat engine and I didn't look back. We could hear the shrieking even as we saw the last scrap of land fade away. It's been almost a week since we were there. Annie and I made it back to the main island and got a quick rest before flying home. And at first, we agreed not to speak of what happened. Not even to tell Jack, or Patsy's family or friends. But such silence felt cruel. So instead we painted a picture of a terrible accident that happened on the way. All the while, my anger and my bitterness towards Will and the island grew. He had lured me there, but why? He had forced me to even lose a limb, and I still only knew that he wanted to satisfy a dark god. His taunting haunted my dreams, until one day I confessed to Annie that I needed to go back. We can't escape this, I told her. She refused to accept our role in our friend's death and denied returning with me, but my mind was made up. I spent the time back to the island recording this to remember the fear and the danger of my first excursion here. My hope is that now, with this new knowledge, I can gain answers. When I land, I automatically get the sense that nothing will be the same. There are no skulls, no signs of a cabin or other structures. The island is simply barren and empty. Only haunting laughter echoing in my head is now crashing into these shores. The reality that my madness will one day consume me, to take my life for having allowed greed to cloud everything I ever did. Truly, this is the Screaming Island. There's just something about looking into the pitch-black metal throat that bubbles up discomforting through a janitor's brain, with nothing but the quiet buzzing of fluorescent lamps for company. People in my line of work start to see things in those tunnels. Shapes curl in and out of space between imagination and reality. Whispers and groans and pleas, once conjured up in the head, start to bleed out and echo throughout the empty halls. Faced with confounding transportation catacombs of Prague, most cleaners don't last a fortnight. Even after 3 years of service, I still sometimes find myself troubled by the seeds of horror which the Prague metro system plants in the human spirit. But when I do find myself anxious about what could be hiding in those still shadows, I practice a simple form of mental hygiene. I close my eyes. I take a deep breath. I imagine myself standing in my janitorial overalls in the center of my soul. All of my fears about the subway tunnels, be they fevered visions of tentacles reaching out from the darkness or echoes of primal grunts coming from the gullet of the underground, they all become droplets of grime that I have to clean. I distill all of my fears, all of my anxieties, all thoughts which I do not want into dirty footsteps on the floor of my soul, and then I put down my mop and I move it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And sooner than you could say soap, the station is clear. The morning commuters are shuffling down the escalators, and I get to reemerge into the Prague sun with a newfound energy and a sense for a job well done. Instead of suffering with dark dreams that the Prague subway system weaves into reality, I would spend each night gliding along those dirty tiles in a meditative mop-based trance. With a bit of focus and some breath work, I thought that I had managed to tame any amount of discomfort that the mysteries of the metro might cause me. For 3 calm years, my system had worked. But last week, it all began to fall apart. Mr. Vorlik was a good boss. One of those people who are so quick with a joke and so full of cheer that one starts to wonder whether they aren't a highly functioning alcoholic. Yet when he called me into his office to talk about my new work placement, there was nothing but sorrow in his eyes. The ugly sister of Prague's main railway depot was the station I was assigned to clean for the next month. I didn't think much of it, just another stop on the yellow line, saw a fair amount of foot traffic, and was in need of a nightly mop down. It wasn't until later that I found out that that janitor had gone missing. The station's to be clean like a regular station, but there's no exception that has to be made, Mr. Vorlik had said, his voice descending into the fine line between speech and a conspiratory whisper. At the north side of the station, there's a steel door. Do not clean anything beyond it. Don't enter it. The further you stay away, the better. What lies behind that barrier needs to remain unseen. Mr. Vorlik was not joking around. Whatever was behind that door was something that I was better off not knowing about. I promised him that I wouldn't peek behind the forbidden barrier and only focus on the cleaning. The rule was simple enough. I thought that if I could block out the fear that the subway tunnels awoke in me, then keeping my curiosity about the door would be a piece of urinal cake. If only it was that easy. The question of the door didn't start properly tugging at my attention until the end of the first night. For a while, I even forgot that there was a mysterious door to begin with. I just moved through the Nadrazin with a sense of cosmic calm, enjoying the citrus-scented tranquility that my job provided. But when I reached the patch of dirty tile in front of the forbidden door, my zen state faded away like soap bubbles in stale water. The door was unlike any other door at the station. It was stronger, it was newer, it was shinier. I needed to know what was on the other side. But I reminded myself that a true janitor doesn't require knowledge of anything but himself. I reminded myself that people often get lost in speculation and worries and memories of the past. I reminded myself that none of these things mattered. I closed my eyes, I grabbed my mop. The floor of my soul was covered with the muddy questions about the nature of the door, but those were questions I was not destined to get answers to. Those are questions that needed to be wiped away. I took a deep breath, and I moved my mop back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The possibilities of what could be hiding behind the steel door still chipped away at my concentration. But by the time the first subway rumbled in, the station was clean and I was free to go home. First nights were always the hardest, I convinced myself. Going forward, I'd be able to remind myself that I'd resisted the pull of the unknown once, and that would give me the strength to do it again. I thought that the lore of the forbidden would become a manageable part of my workday, that things would get better from that point forward. I was wrong. The first night at the Najazine was a sea of tranquility compared to what was going to come. To my disappointment, the temptation was still there on the following night. It took significant mental energy and more deep breaths than I care to admit, but I managed to clean the floor outside of that elusive steel passageway without looking up. With the patch of tiling that neighbored my obsession out of the way, I moved over to the other side of the station, hoping that being farther away from that door would soothe my mind. It didn't. Within half an hour, my mop had made a direct line through the station back to the steel temptation. Yet as I arrived at the forbidden door, something gave me pause. In the freshly cleaned tiles, the same tiles that I had desperately scrubbed away while trying to ignore the burning curiosity in the pit of my stomach, was a set of muddy footprints that led directly to the door. I dipped my mop in my bucket and prepared to wipe up the mysterious grime, but before my arms could push the mop across the footsteps, they revolted. I found myself touching the handle of the door. Without thinking, I pushed down. For 2 nights, the promise of entering the door had haunted me, but I never checked if it was unlocked. It wasn't. Even if I wanted to enter the forbidden passage, I couldn't. It was locked. Took a deep breath. I tried not to be angry with myself. My lapse of self-control was in the past, and the only thing that mattered for a clean mind was the present. Cleared my head of all thoughts, put down my mop, and moved it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The usual rays of the morning sun were nowhere to be found when I emerged from the station. Dark clouds had gathered above Prague. A thick, frigid rain was cleansing the streets. As I shivered in the cold, waiting for my bus home, the question of the footsteps kept my jaw clenched. I needed to know. There was no tranquility the next night. I found my mind wandering constantly. The amount of cleaning that would take me an hour on a good day dragged on into half of my shift. The thoughts came with aggressive regularity. Every time I found my mind on the edge of that quietude that had become my steady companion for the past 3 years, the questions would emerge. What was behind that door? Who had dirtied the tiles of the station with their footsteps? Why was I not allowed to investigate? It was as if someone was running through my soul with a wastebasket full of shredded secret documents. I was a janitor. I was meant to clean them away and do my job, but I was also human. I wanted to sort through all the garbage and construct an image that was not meant for my eyes. After what felt like an eternity of waging a war within myself, I finally caved in. I decided on a compromise. The patch of tile outside of the door deserved an extra wash, and while I was there, I could indulge in a bit of investigation. Entering the door was forbidden. Mr. Vorlich had never said anything about listening to what was on the other side. When I arrived with my mop and bucket, there was another set of footsteps leading to the door. I didn't even bother cleaning them up. Leaving my soapy bucket behind, I tiptoed over to the door and pressed my ear against it. I desperately hoped that getting a hint of what could be on the other side would satiate me, that I could return back to my calm job with a morsel of information safely in the pocket of my suspenders, but that hope was misguided. The cold surface of the door revealed nothing. I stood there for longer than I cared to admit. I even started mopping a bit, one hand keeping my ear company against the door and the other limply pushing the mop around to justify my obsession. I would have made for quite the amusing sight. And just as my sense of self-respect started to gnaw at me, something else stopped my eavesdropping. Footsteps. Nearby footsteps. By the time I looked up, I could see him. A young man in blue overalls was making his way towards the door. There was a blank expression on his face, as if he was a man who fell asleep in uniform and was roaming the streets in a sleepwalking trance. "Oh, hello, In a fit of confusion, I pointed to my mop. "There's the janitor trying to figure out if anything behind the door needs cleaning." The man in the overalls didn't acknowledge me. Wordlessly, he walked past me, he opened the door, and entered the dark unknown beyond. All that he left behind was a set of footprints, wet from the rain outside. I wish I could say that I remembered Mr. Vorlick's solemn face, or that I thought about cleaning up the trail that the quiet stranger had left behind, but I didn't. Without a second thought, I shoved my mop into the closing door, and I entered the dark hallway. It took my eyes a couple seconds to adjust to the dimness of the corridor, but his footsteps were easy to follow. I held onto the mop tight. If the man asked me what I was doing behind the forbidden door, I planned on feigning ignorance and playing the role of the innocent janitor who was just looking for things to clean. But the man never turned around. He never questioned me following him. He simply made his way down the hallway. The comforting scent of my cleaning supplies was gone. Now was a smell of burnt food lingering in the air. A freight elevator stood at the end of the hallway. Its floor looked like it wasn't washed for a month, if ever. Really dirty floor. "Good thing I'm a janitor," I said, hoping to strike up a conversation. The man ignored me and ordered the elevator to move. With a rusty groan, we descended below the Nadrazine. I thought of my bucket sitting outside of the forbidden door, alone, a piece of evidence of my rule-breaking. As the freight elevator descended, I promised myself that I would return to it as soon as I could. I also promised myself I would mine as much information from the stranger to ensure that I wouldn't abandon my bucket again. So, if a humble janitor may ask, "Where's this elevator going?" The man didn't respond. He remained at the elevator controls as if I didn't exist at all. Now, I'm not an angry person. Whenever I find myself frustrated, I just imagine whatever's irritating me as a particularly dirty staircase. It might take time to restore the stairs to their intrinsic cleanliness, but with enough calm mopping, the problem will disappear. Yet as I stood there, in that elevator, the strands of my mop caked in grime, I had no patience for staircases. You know, it's really rude to pretend someone doesn't exist. I'm just a friendly janitor trying to make conversation. Least you can do is acknowledge me, I said, with considerably more anger than I had anticipated. This time the man did respond, but he didn't speak. He whimpered. Like a dirty puppy stuck under a bridge, the man whimpered. There were tears in his eyes. "Sorry for yelling," I said, feeling bad about my outburst. But before I had a chance to ask him if he was okay, the elevator grinded to a halt. As the doors creaked open, the smell of smoke strengthened to an almost unbreathable degree. Distinct memories of sitting on the wrong side of a bonfire lingered to the back of my skull, but they were swiftly crushed under the vision of the underground hellscape. There were people wearing blue overalls, men and women, old and new. They all picked away at a long assembly line of rusted metal. Unlike the strangers' clothes, their uniforms were filthy, tattered, and in places caked in dark splotches of red. The workers all looked as if something primal was draining from them, as if they were simply puppets that had any semblance of humanity replaced with an utter dedication to the sorting of metal on the assembly line. Yet as they worked, one trance of human emotion remained. They all wept. All the workers in the factory openly wept. Soon, I found out why. I didn't even register the stranger leaving. As soon as I saw the horrid contraption at the end of the hall, my hands were slamming on the elevator to go back up, to leave, to rid me of the harrowing sight of the machine. When the metal doors screeched to a close, I could see the stranger joining the procession of weeping labor. His whimpering cracked into pained wails, and then he was gone. I didn't feel sorry for him. I couldn't feel sorry for him. My mind was wholly occupied by the searing image of the machine. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath through my shuddering lungs. I imagined I was holding a mop in the hallway of my soul. I swept it across the dirt, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That maw, that horrible blazing toothed mouth of flame. I knew it was right below me. Its flames reaching out into the world beyond, needing, craving, demanding more fuel for the inferno that raged in the machine's metal shell. I tried to remind myself that we're all janitors of our own mind. We get to choose the cleanliness of our spirit. That worries are just bits of dirty tile that we can move a mop across back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. All that I could smell was smoke. All that I could hear were the cries of the tortured masses. All that I could imagine was being in that line of lost souls, wearing those filthy blue overalls, weeping. I kept my eyes closed. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that every problem, every obstacle, every bit of mental debris could be dealt with. All it would take was patience. All that it would take was for me to move my mop back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. By the time the freight elevator reached its destination, the bristles of my mop had turned a pitch black. I usually care about the state of my equipment, but I didn't then. All I wanted to do was to get as far away as possible from that infernal sight. The mop turned my bucket the color of the darkest night. Once I caught my breath, once I had made enough peace with what burns beneath the nadrazine to get my legs back under my control, I emptied out the bucket and I refilled it with fresh water. It took 3 more buckets and a good helping of my sanitation supplies to make the mop clean enough to use, but the images that had been seared into my mind still burnt with a stifling intensity. Mr. Vorlich was right to warn me. What exists beyond that door was never meant to be seen. But now that it has been seen, now that I'm aware of the horrible contraption hidden beneath the nadrazine, I find myself at a loss of what to do. The best idea I had was to chronicle my story in this sleepless corner of the internet, to hope that someone could explain why such a horrible machine would exist. But I know that what I have seen is beyond explanation. The inner world of my soul is a burning garbage fire. Every thought that I have is shrouded in the smoke of that horrible contraption. I don't know how to carry on, but I know that I have to. My mind is a prison of white-hot, jagged metal, and yet I still have a job to do. I've been in the Prague janitorial service for 3 years. I never left a station unclean. I have to close my eyes and I have to take a deep breath. Some doors are meant to remain locked. Some questions are meant to remain unanswered. There's enough mystery in the world to drive any janitor insane, but even in a universe of chaos, a clean mind can still exist. The floors of my soul are covered in black grime, and my head spins with the memories of the stifling smoke, but I have control over my spirit. It might take a long time. It might take a lot of effort. But with enough focus and enough effort, a clean mind can be achieved. All I need to do is to take my mop and move it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And hopefully, one day, I'll escape the visions of the machine. Hey there, kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to tell you about a sponsor of tonight's episode. These great sponsors are able to bring you stories that are things like exclusives for the channel or continuing series that you guys seem to like and keep asking for, so hey, it's a very big thank you to HelloFresh. Looking for a spring refresh? Try something new. Take your taste buds on a trip and explore different global flavors from your dinner table with HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, there's step-by-step recipes that are super easy to follow and pre-portioned ingredients that help me cut out prep time so that I have more time to do other things that I enjoy. You know, like virtual reality, horror games, horror movies, horror books. And HelloFresh is up to 72% cheaper than dining at a restaurant, which I'm going to say right now, I think everybody, for the past couple of years, right? We've all been staying inside. We've all gotten ourselves a bit of the DoorDash addictions. HelloFresh is here to cut some of those things out. HelloFresh is the first carbon-neutral meal kit company, and nearly all packaging is recyclable, which is also good, and it cuts down on your food waste by at least 25% compared to, say, grocery shopping. And for you picky eaters, HelloFresh has a 50 weekly options for less what's for dinner and more what else can I do with all this time? So you can go over to HelloFresh.com and use code CreepyPasta16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. That's HelloFresh.com, and that's CreepyPasta16. You know, just like the channel name, CreepyPasta16. I just recently started HelloFresh myself. You're going to see a little bit of my incredibly messy kitchen here as I make meals from HelloFresh, but quite honestly, this is doing so much for me right now. It helps me stay on track with nutrition, which, let's be honest, I don't do so well. And quite honestly, I like it. I mean, there's always this promo, but this is something I plan on keeping for a good while. So once again, if you want to be like me, plus if you want to get 16 free meals, then you can use CreepyPasta16, get those 16 free meals, plus 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes. Plus, there's free shipping. Take a look at the website down below, HelloFresh.com, to be able to start your free trial now. And now, on to tonight's story. My friend and I were hungry, but collectively broke, so we decided to get some cheap fast food. And for the purpose of our privacy and the safety of our group, I won't share the name of the restaurant in question, but I'm sure you can guess which one I'm talking about. Right when we got there, Amanda, the girlfriend of my friend Carter, said that she needed to use the bathroom and order for her. She always got the same thing, so it was no problem. And when it was our turn in line, we placed our order and went to stand off to the side. After a few minutes, Amanda came speed walking out, looking as if she'd seen a ghost in the toilet. Silently, but wildly, she beckoned for us to come to the bathroom with her. Carter had started to laugh, but Amanda's increasing hysterics drove him to at least stifle his humor. Jessica, the last of our group, and my girlfriend was the first to accept Amanda's strange invitation, knowing that our massive order would take a while to complete. I followed them. I heard Carter's footsteps trailing behind me as I rounded the corner that led to the bathrooms. Still keeping her panicked silence, Amanda led us down the short hall to the unisex bathroom, which she'd apparently had to use due to the woman's being out of order. She pushed the door open, motioning for us to all go inside. After checking to make sure that no one had followed, entered behind us, quickly closing and locking the door. The room was as normal as any public restroom, with its plain white walls, its faint scent of chemical cleaner, combined with an even fainter scent of use. There was only one basic toilet without any stall walls to conceal it, and one accompanying sink. A floor mat sat just below the sink, bearing a faded floral pattern and the words, "Wash away your troubles," on its surface. Bunched inside the small room, we all looked at Amanda for an explanation, and after a moment spent regaining her composure, she finally pointed to the floor mat and said, "Look under it." Seeing as how it was a public bathroom and no one was eager to touch anything that had been on the floor for who knows how long, finally, after a few failed attempts, Heads nodded, and shoulders nudged to get others to do the deed. Jessica bit the bullet and pulled away the mat with her fingers. Beneath the mat was a panel of some kind, of a different material than the tiled floor around it. There were two small brass knobs on the panel, like handles to a trapdoor. Due to the thickness of the floor mat and how the panel actually rested slightly below the floor level, they'd been undetectable. Nice find, Amanda, Carter, now intrigued, clapping his girlfriend on the back, but Amanda, still somewhat unsettled, shook her head disapprovingly and responded, "Look inside." Shrugging, Carter knelt and gripped the two small knobs. After a confirming glance towards Amanda, he pushed, opening the panel. All of us, except Amanda, of course, gasped in surprise. There was a long tunnel below the open panels, a ladder leading down into it, but it wasn't an ordinary ladder. Both the frame and rungs were yellow, cracked. The one hand and footholds haphazardly fitted into crudely segmented frames. The ladder was made of bone. Despite the grisly structure before him, Carter's grin widened, and without any kind of preamble, he gripped the topmost rung and began his descent into the subterranean tunnel. Jessica was the next to follow, and when Amanda saw me positioning myself to go third, she finally broke her spell of silence and asked what the hell we were doing. Calling up from the tunnel, Carter said with complete casualness, "Amanda, there's a tunnel in the bathroom. We have to check it out." I felt similarly, and I'm sure Jessica did as well. Left with no choice but to follow, Amanda came along, whimpering as she gripped the bony rung. After a slow, downward climb of maybe 20 or 30 seconds, we reached a darkly cavernous space. The walls were mushy, damp, convulsive, like the interior of a choking person's throat. Carter put his hand on one and smeared the surface, leaving a long swath in the dark pink substance. It was obvious that if you applied enough force, you could probably pass through the walls, but none of us were eager to try. The corridors squelched and squirted, making us all bunched together closely. Despite the awkwardness of doing so, no one wanted to be pressed upon or even grazed by the living, leaking walls. Disgusted, but almost morbidly curious, we continued on towards the deepening darkness. My key fob's light, our sole source of illumination, everyone's phones had, upon entering the flesh cave, suddenly and inexplicably died. The corridor narrowed as we went on, and the walls became further dampened, as if we were truly entering the interior of some living body. Eventually, we had to file one by one into a long, tremulous hall, and everyone, including myself, groaned and whimpered, or even retched, as our bodies came upon unwanted contact with the wetly quivering surfaces. Fortunately, this narrow passageway led into an open chamber, but unfortunately, this chamber was even more grotesque, more sickening than the preceding area. It was a circular room, and of course, every surface was flesh-covered, slick with strange fluid, and trembling violently. Unlike the tunnel, the walls were emitting a faint red light of their own, some sort of hidden bioluminescence. Lying about the room, arranged in a circular fashion against the walls, were slabs of meat, or what appeared to be meat. Carter approached the nearest one to our left, with Amanda begrudgingly in tow. Since she had been tightly holding onto his arm throughout the entire dreadful journey, leaning in close, he examined the slab and even poked it with his hand. The same hand that had smeared the fleshy wall. Weirdly, the surface didn't give as much as the wall had, and Carter had to exert considerable force to make an impression. Solid, at least compared to the walls, like a box. His voice was, despite the circumstance, fairly relaxed and almost joyous. No, not like a box. Look! There's a break in the surface near the top. It's not like a box, it's like a coffin. Amanda's voice had appropriately stuttered, in tone with the mounting discomfort that we all assuredly felt. She was right. There was a break in the surface as if the slab had a lid. Looking around, I saw that the other slabs were all similarly segmented at the top. Upon seeing that, Carter intended to open the slab. Amanda let go of his arm and came to stand by me. Jessica, who'd been quiet the entire trip, suddenly spoke up, saying, "If they're coffins, and the walls are alive, you don't think the occupants could be alive too, do you?" Carter's hand stopped in progress towards the coffin lid. He looked around, suddenly nervous. There were 6 coffins in total, and Jessica's cryptic implication made me realize just how large the coffins were, how they could seemingly hold multiple beings in each, or one massive thing. Well, if they're anything like the place they inhabit, I doubt they'll pose much of a threat. With that self-assuring comment, Carter grabbed the crimson lid and pushed it forward. The lid slid away with a sound too abhorrent to describe, and a haze, a stinking fume of hot meatiness, wafted up from the coffin's interior. We all shrank back, all except Carter, who actually leaned in, anxious to get a look at whatever was inside. When the funk cleared, as much as it would, considering the environment, we all returned, our curiosities too intrigued to stay away for long. Inside, reposing exactly like a coffin-lid corpse, was a giant cadaver, seemingly composed of meat. Its general figure was that of a man, albeit a massive one, and its utterly faceless head, bulbously crowned with a square jaw, constituted a great portion of the upper area. The temples touched both sides of the interior. The body was not as broad, but still larger than that of any man, and the body, it was beyond hideous. It was as if a man had been skinned and the raw pink flesh beneath somehow inflamed to become a sort of armor. The subdermal musculature was apparent, but everything seemed somehow wrong compared to the anatomy of a human. The shoulders and the chest were seemingly merged, as if they'd been unnaturally fused in some horrible mutation or forced experimentation. The arrangement of its abdominal muscles were diamond-shaped, tapered in the upper and lower ends. The groin was indescribably malformed. It was a juggernaut of grotesquerie, and the accompanying stench, not of putrefaction, but something worse, burned my nostrils and limited the amount of time I could spend gazing directly at it. Finally, having gotten my sick fill of the abominable thing, I turned away and I looked to the other coffins, wondering if they had held similarly awful things, or things somehow worse. But before I could think to investigate them, a sound floated into the room from out of the corridor, alerting us to the approach of someone else. I'll never forgive Carter for his next comment, his next unimaginable suggestion, even though it probably saved all of our lives. As the sounds of someone pushed through the throat-like tunnel grew louder, Carter glanced around grimly and then said, "We have to get inside the coffins. There's more than enough to house all of us, but I think it'll be best if we double up, just in case whoever's coming intends to have a peek inside one. It'll lower our chances of being discovered." There wasn't any time to protest. Even though I really wanted to, Amanda, terror-stricken, wrapped her arms around Carter, practically driven mad by the idea. Jessica, her polar opposite, led me towards the rightmost coffin and pushed away the flesh lid. Inside was a veritable clone of the other entity, a giant of gruesomely exposed and bizarrely warped flesh. Jessica crawled inside first, and the sound of the meat accompanying her weight almost turned my stomach. Steeling myself against the awful funk, I climbed in too, and after confirming that Carter and Amanda had entered theirs, shut the coffin lid, sealing us inside. A few moments later, the sound of someone pushing through the final narrow passageway echoed into the charnel chamber, and I began listening intently with my ear pressed against the inner wall of the coffin. Jessica, lying somewhat beneath and beside me, listened with hers pressed against the opposite wall. Thankfully, sensibly, we'd climbed in so that our heads were at the foot of the interred man. Its globe-like head would have surely crowded the space. Outside the coffin, I heard someone walking around, presumably inspecting the area.
I wasn't sure if they were searching for us or merely performing some routine check of the infernal chamber. After a few more moments, during which their footsteps echoed with surprising clarity, there was an all-too-familiar sound. The sound of one of the coffins being opened. With my fingers crossed, I prayed that they hadn't opened Amanda and Carter's. Listening for any sounds of horror or struggle, I took a breath and held it, and heard Jessica do the same. When a few seconds of silence had passed, I came to the conclusion that Carter and Amanda's coffin had not been opened. My dread subsided a little. "We should peek out and see what they're doing," Jessica whispered. Jessica's whisper had been faint, but within the coffin's interior was surprisingly audible. And a brief panic arose in me, but after a breathless moment, there were no sounds that might have suggested that we'd been discovered. After taking a breath, I responded, "Are you crazy? What if they see us, or hear the lid moving?" "Watch, I'm sure I can move it without making a sound. Carter was just too forceful when he did it." Before I could protest, she had placed her hand on the lid's ceiling and was gently pushing forward, inching it along. After a few seconds, there was a slit in the rim, and we could just barely see through the opening into the nightmarish room beyond. Across the room, just beside the coffin Carter and Amanda had climbed into, was a man. And not just a man, but an employee of the restaurant we'd entered on the surface level. Despite the environment, his uniform was clean, it was dry, adherent to the establishment's dress code. He had peered into the coffin to the right of Carter's and was holding a large dish of some kind in one hand. With the other, he was scooping out portions of meat, crudely excising them from the body therein. I involuntarily gagged, and Jessica pinched the back of my neck, urging me to be quiet. For what seemed like hours, we watched the man remove chunks and bits from the body until the dish was finally terribly full. A mountain of porous crimson rising from its base. When it could hold no more without the threat of its contents spilling over, he set the dish on the floor, closed the coffin lid, and then took up the dish again. Without a second glance, without having suspected the tomb be occupied by anything other than the loathsome giants, he left the room. We waited a few moments until the sounds of his departure finally died out, and then emerged from our hiding spot. Not a second later, Carter and Amanda did the same, and both came out gagging and shaking. From the looks of it, they had crawled with their heads beside the occupants. Did you guys see that? Carter's face had lost its boyish confidence, now having a pallor more befitting the sepulchral circumstances. Amanda was similarly white, though tears streaked her face. I immediately understood why Carter was so uncharacteristically distraught. The reason for why the employee had come down didn't need to be openly stated, but I said it anyway just to get it out there. This is where the meat comes from. My voice sounded hollow, lifeless in the dismally echoing chamber. We all stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation, a horrid revelation chilling into our cores. We had all, at one time or another, eaten at the restaurant. Carter, plenty of times. Amanda, nearly as many, since she'd usually go with him. The food had always been at least decent, even really good on certain occasions, but no one could have imagined its unspeakable origins. Suddenly, Jessica's disposition changed, and I saw a flicker of hope in her reddened eyes. Wait, there are only 6 coffins, and hundreds of people visit this restaurant every day. There's no way they've been feeding people the flesh of these things this whole time. This has to be a recent thing, some desperate measure or new experiment. The room seemed to grow a little brighter at the hopeful prospect. Wondering just how much the employee had taken from the corpse, I went over to its coffin and pushed open the lid, but the sight inside made me recoil. And the small amount of hope I'd mustered was quickly blasted away, leaving me even more despondent and sickened than before. The corpse was regenerating. It already regenerated most of the portions taken from its torso. The others joined me, and all in turn reeled or shrank away, their moods plummeting. Silently, we returned the room to its former state. Then we left the chamber. We re-entered the tunnel, not bothering to shield ourselves from the convulsing walls, and exited the tomb. When everyone had climbed up the ladder with its rungs of bone, I covered the entrance with a floor mat and led the way out of the bathroom. Simultaneously, all our phones buzzed and chirped, coming to life again. We passed by the front counter. One of the employees called out, saying, "Oh, hey guys, your order's ready." Amanda took one look at the stack of fresh burgers and vomited onto the floor. She muffled out some half-apology and then shuffled off towards the exit. Without any word, the rest of us followed. It's been almost a month since we sent a camera down to the Challenger Deep, part of the wider Marianas Trench. There's not much money in deep-sea exploration. There's always been a passion project for us. Thankfully, it seems to be that way for some wealthier individuals, too. We were finally able to secure funding for an extensive and expensive mapping of the deep-sea floor and the species that inhabit the waters there. The camera uses a combination of echolocation to detect both land formations and moving targets and their size, and a light to be able to capture them on film. The project proved to be a success, and during our first week we managed to see a frilled shark, a vampire squid, and even a glass octopus. We took turns watching the footage, although most of the time one person watching quickly turned into four since none of us could stand the thought of missing something exceptional. A little over a week ago, however, I was alone. It had been an uneventful few days since we were exploring the deepest part of the trench, and at over 10 kilometers deep, there weren't many creatures to encounter. The only reason we even bothered to spend so much time there was to map the land formations. Suddenly I was awakened from my thoughts by the beep of the monitor as it detected something moving. I looked up and almost fell from my chair. What it was detecting was roughly the size of an apartment building. I shouted for my colleagues and took over the controls by hand, trying to steer the camera towards whatever was emitting the sound. It was moving away from us, so I decided to shoot my shot and turn the light on. Maybe we'd catch a glimpse. At first there was nothing, but then something flashed across the left corner of the screen. "That's a fucking fin or tail," Dan said in disbelief. Natalie was squinting at the screen. Was it a whale? "Whatever it was," I said, "it's gone now." The radar had gone silent. "If it was a whale, this would be the discovery of the century," Dan said. "That's over 10 kilometers deep." John shook his head. "There's no way that was a whale." "Well, what do you suggest then? The fucking Loch Ness Monster?" "How stupid do you think I am, Nat?" John said with a faint annoyance. "He was obviously going to say Godzilla." Despite our imminent disbelief, we agreed there was probably some kind of whale, and that we should stay in the area to maybe confirm the sighting. "Maybe there's some fame to be gained from all this after all," Dan laughed. "Fucking whale! In the Mariana Trench!" Days went by, and nothing happened. We almost started to feel like what we saw was just some shared hallucination born from our boredom and desire to find something remarkable. But just when we were about to lose all hope and return to the more shallow waters, it happened again. This time, the enormous being was coming towards us at full speed, and right away, as the light turned on, we saw something that froze us in our seats. It was an eye, followed by sharp, anglerfish-like teeth. And then something that might have been a fin, but looked disturbingly much like a hand. After that, everything went dark and the camera stopped responding. Dan broke the silence. "I think it hit the camera with its tail," he said. "What the fuck was that?" Natalie said without taking her eyes off the black screen. "Kinda looked like an anglerfish," John said. Dan shook his head in disbelief. "Yeah, a 30-meter long anglerfish." I sat silently, pondering whether I should bring up what I think I saw, even at the risk of sounding batshit crazy. Ultimately, I decided that the situation was crazy anyway, so I might as well just come clean. This is gonna sound stupid, I started. But did you guys see a hand? Everyone was staring at me silently. Yeah, John said in a quiet voice. Natalie nodded her head. The next few days were spent on how we should bring up the news of the camera breaking with Kaito, our founder. Our contract also stated that we should inform him of all discoveries that we make. I think we were pretty shaken up, but we managed to keep our wits about us by focusing on the task at hand. The general consensus was that we had to tell him the truth. You might think that we were losing our minds, but at least then there was a chance, however slim, that we could continue our exploration. It's not like he would just buy us a new $10,000 camera if we said that we crashed it into a rock. The fateful day came, and with it, Kaito to visit our research station. He seemed to sense something was off right away and demanded an explanation for the 2 days of missing updates. We explained to him what happened and everything we saw, fully expecting him to storm out or laugh at us. To our surprise, all he said was a simple, "Where?" 10.6 kilometers from the surface, I said. No, I mean exact coordinates for both encounters, he said in a grave yet weirdly excited tone. We gave the coordinates to Kaito. He thanked us. It started to leave. Before he made his way to the door, Dan stopped him and asked him if we could continue our project. There's no need, Kaito said, and disappeared off the door before any of us could protest. We were defeated. After all this time, we had nothing to show for our troubles and no hope of starting over. Our equipment was laying at the bottom of the ocean with all of our precious footage. Still, none of us wanted to go home, since that would mean admitting it was over. A week went by as we desperately tried to get the camera to work again. And then, everything changed. Kaito called us and asked us to come meet him at his research station in Umatek, the village in Guam. We happily agreed, thinking that he had changed his mind about discontinuing our operation. We traveled there the same afternoon. At the door, we were greeted by Kaito's assistant and 4 NDAs. We didn't think much of it, since a research facility in the middle of nowhere probably wasn't the most public place in the world. I mean, I acknowledge I'm breaking mine by telling all of you this, but what we saw there simply cannot be kept a secret. Once inside, we were greeted by Kaito and led along a corridor to a room that looked more like a hangar than a laboratory. At the other side of the hall, there was this huge tank full of water. It took up most of the room, and it was impossible to say how far it stretched. And then I saw what was in it. It was about the size of a blue whale, with a tail resembling a fish's, except for jellyfish-like tentacles spreading out from it. Higher up, the tail turned into something resembling a torso with long, spindly hands protruding from it. They were covered with the same tentacles as the tail. The whole thing was almost completely see-through, and I could see its organs squirming inside of it. I forced myself to look at its face and saw angler fish-like mouths with sharp needles, unevenly scattered teeth penetrating the ghostly flesh of its gums. The eyes were small, at least compared to its size, and completely white, staring at us emptily. A shiver ran across my back. I've never felt so small in my entire life as I did standing next to the towering creature. One single tooth was the same size as me. It could devour every single one of us without even noticing.
That was what scared me the most. The idea that this thing could destroy us with no malice, no acknowledgement. We were to it like ants are to us, small, insignificant beings, being trampled as we made our way through our everyday life. That's a pressurized tank, Kaito said while we were staring at it in awe. Take it out from there and it collapses on itself. Almost died during transport. The thing can't survive at normal air pressure. What is it? I asked without taking my eyes off the tank. It's a mermaid, Kaito said and laughed. Or at least as close to that as we were going to get. Kaito explained to us that the whole reason he funded our expedition was to find this creature and to capture it. He had always been obsessed with mermaids, sure that somewhere deep beneath the surface of the sea, they truly existed. As it turns out, he was right. Questions flowed out of us like seawater from the mouths of someone saved from drowning. Kaito could tell us very little about the creature, only that it was around 130 years old, probably a predator based on its looks, and almost completely blind. It probably uses some kind of sound waves to see in the dark, maybe to communicate too. I'm planning on measuring those soon, Kaito said. He promised that he could tell us more in a few weeks, since he would have finished most of the tests by then. He offered to let us stay at the station until then, as long as we promised not to disturb him. In fact, no one was coming inside the hall where Ningyo, as Kaito had named the creature, was held. We left, and he locked himself in. Needless to say, none of us got much sleep that night, whether it was out of excitement, fear, or a combination of both. That was 2 weeks ago, and today, we're going back. I don't know what we're about to learn, but whatever it is, it's going to change the way that we look at other life forms. I'm terrified to step inside that room, yet it's the only thing that feels worthwhile in this life. I'll update you as soon as I get back. Hopefully, with some new discoveries. I've always suffered with insomnia. Even from a young age, like 9 or 12, it's always plagued me. I usually just stay up doing meditative things until I fall asleep. That's before I got my car and driver's license. Now I just take long drives to the rural parts of my county, where the woods and the farmland are. No one's ever on the road, so it's very peaceful. With that being said, it doesn't mean that I'm alone on these dirt roads. Things I've seen have both horrified and intrigued me. I'll share a few experiences I've had on these stretches of lonely road. Number 1, the figure. During my late night drives, I went farther than I usually do. The road gets older and more overgrown in these parts. It basically leads to a very ancient forest with nothing but tire marks as a road. I'm driving and all of a sudden I catch something in my headlights. A tall humanoid figure covered up in bushes, facing a tree with its arms by its side, Blair Witch style. I've seen stuff like this before, so I just take a mental note and I continue on exploring. The things you encounter out here at night aren't necessarily hostile. They won't mess with you if you don't mess with them. I didn't see that particular figure for the rest of the night, and I didn't get a good look at them because of the bushes covering them. All I knew at the time is that they were tall as shit. I'm talking making basketball players look scrawny. Other than its freakish height, the proportions were all out of whack. One shoulder was huge and beefy, but had a twig-like arm attached to it, and the other shoulder was thin, but had a bodybuilder arm at the end of it. The night was pretty uneventful, so I decided to head back early and try to sleep. The next night was much more interesting. As per usual, I couldn't sleep, so I hopped onto my car and I drove to the rural dirt roads. I decided to head back into the deep woods to see if I could see that weird, tall figure again. I'm driving slowly down this forest for about 30 minutes, radio off, dead silent woods, and I don't see a thing, which is pretty uncommon not to see something weird. I closed my eyes and I sighed, running my fingers through my hair. When I opened them, the figure was there. Misshapen body, arms at its sides, facing the opposite direction. It was directly in front of my headlights, and I got a better look at it. This thing was wearing a filthy dark green trench coat with some torn brown jeans and boots spattered with mud. The figure's legs were also misshapen and uneven. One leg was swollen and was as thick as a car tire, while the other leg was literally just skin and bones. The hair on the back of its head wax patchy and looked like a failed buzz cut. It stretched out its skinny arms like it was getting ready to point at something to the side. The figure's hands made finger scissors that opened and closed. I sat there completely in shock. My heart sank with the realization it was mocking me. A while back in school, I got bullied by this asshole who called me Snip Snip and would constantly make the same scissoring motion with his fingers. He called me this because, well, I'm a trans girl. I grunted in anger and I gestured for this thing to move to the side. Its back was facing me, so it didn't see. I had serious thoughts of running this thing over, but I remembered, if I don't mess with them, they won't harm me. I just drove around and I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror to see its face. It was facing backwards for a reason. I still see it from time to time, and it's always mocking me with that gesture, mimicking something painful from my past. Sign language to mock my siblings who went deaf from an infection, waving a fist around violently to reference my physical ex. The gesture of holding a cigarette to make fun of my aunt who died of lung cancer, etc. This thing really pisses me off more than anything. Its mutated ass body is kind of unnerving, though. Number 2, the Eater. The Eater is a pretty common one I see on these roads at night. My first encounter with it was just like all the other times that I see this thing. It's semi-humanoid with pitch black skin and a very obese frame. It walks on all fours like a gorilla. Its tiny claws for hands. Its face is like a leech with dead glazed over eyes on the side of its neck. The gross thing has a long tongue. I'll see it early on my drives. The Eater's usually crouched over a corpse of a dead animal with a chunk of the carcass meat in its hands. The Eater just licks the meat with that long tongue. Just laps up gore and blood. I don't think it hunts. It's more of a scavenger. The Eater is very docile and gets kind of curious when I pass by. It doesn't get too close, though. Sometimes I'll throw some leftover dinner that I have into the tall grasses for it. I still wouldn't touch it if you fucking paid me. Live and let live is what I've learned in these places. Number 3. Skinless. Skinless is one of the more dangerous things out in these woods. Whenever I see her, I immediately turn around and I go straight home. She's a skinless woman, hence the name. In a white dress soaked in blood. Her flayed body is always bleeding, and she has a large butcher's knife clenched in her hand. She appears in the tall grass and will stumble towards your car slowly. She's slow, but she will catch up eventually. Skinless will stand by your driver's side window and tap her knife against the glass. She'll ask you if she's beautiful in a voice that echoes through your soul. It sounds like a much more demonic voice is speaking under hers. If you lock eyes with Skinless, you'll have the uncontrollable urge to gag or to throw up. If you do throw up or gag, she'll violently smash your window and try to flay your skin off. I've only had this happen once, and I managed to speed off before she could shout out the window. She kept screaming about how she'll skin me alive. If you do basically anything, she'll kill you. I haven't really bothered to try saying yes because it's nearly impossible with the crippling fear and that sick feeling you get in your stomach. Your best option is to just drive away before she catches up. Once you get out of those grasses and civilization, you're pretty much fine. I may write about my first encounter with Skinless in a separate post. If you see her in the distance, just turn around. Don't look back. Number 4. Headlights. This is by far the most dangerous creature that I've encountered on my drives. If you see this thing, you better go as fast as you can in the other direction and pray to every single goddamn deity that you know. I almost stopped going on drives after I met this thing. Last month, I was on a drive that was eerily calm. There was nothing. No wind, no rattling, not even any strange apparitions. I thought it was strange. I slowed down slightly while driving, and my eyes darted to every corner of the tall grass in the forest. It was absolutely nothing. Skinless usually scare off some other entities and animals, but she only appears once every couple of weeks. This was different. This continued until I reached an old farm at the edge of the tall grass. I usually pull to a crawl and look at the barn. Sometimes there's shadows or strange ram-like creatures that walk by the windows. Nothing walked by the windows. Strangely, the absence of any horrible monster was making me afraid. That's when I saw it. 2 huge headlights, stabbing my eyes like 2 suns. I heard the rumbling sputter of a damaged engine. In front of me was a 1940-style truck, painted completely black. A sense of impending death fell over me like a macabre blanket, and I quickly fumbled with the stick shift to put my car in reverse. I finally floored it as a scream erupted from the inside of the truck. The scream was not of this world. It ripped all the joy I had in my heart out and into the starless night, and whatever was driving that thing was pure evil. He was an ancient force of malice, like the boogeyman or the devil. The truck engine growled, and it peeled after me while I was in reverse. I didn't have time to run around, or else it would cut me off and crash into me, and eventually I reached a clearing where I could turn around, and putting all of my weight into turning the steering wheel, I zoomed down the forgotten stretch of road with the truck in hot pursuit. My radio came to life with a piercing roar of static. It played an audio that haunts me to this day. A woman was screaming in pure fear. A deep primal howl of pure dread. In the background of her screams was that old "Here Comes the Boogeyman" song. A masculine voice could also be heard mumbling. There was a slicing sound, and the woman's screams somehow got louder. I peered into the rear view again to see another horrible thing. 2 huge, pale arms that were 6 feet long, coming out from behind the black truck. The hands balled into fists and tried to slam into my rear window, but I quickly swerved, almost hitting a tree. These pale arms coming from the truck galloped along the ground, helping it gain speed. I soared out of the old roads and pulled onto a modern street and slammed the brakes at a gas station. And as I caught my breath, refueled from that horrible experience, I noticed my radio was spewing a choppy static. It sounded like a dying moan. Yeah, I haven't been out driving for a while after. I think I'm going to start taking a different route. But if you do find yourself there, remember to chuck some meat out in the field. Look out for Skinless. And don't even think about heading to that barn. We were never supposed to be here. 48 kilometers past the Arctic Circle, the lone helicopter neared its target. According to the classified report she'd been graciously given, the facility wasn't even supposed to exist. Even from this angle, it wasn't much of a surprise to see that the majority of the structure was still covered in ice and debris from explosion, meaning rescue would likely take days, if not weeks, without the right resources. Even with that added bonus, the chances were slim. What were the odds that the scientists and other personnel below would even survive hours with limited oxygen? Beverly knew better than to voice her concerns, though. Her employers didn't pay her to ask questions. Take samples, catalog the findings, and eliminate all damaging evidence. That had been her mission statement for the past 7 years. The pilot landed the helicopter near where her envoy was waiting, and she gathered her belongings, preparing herself for the harsh cold beyond. Not many dared to brave this pocket of the world, and most who did would likely be considered insane. "Dr. Warren, welcome to Site Levican," the rescue team captain shouted over the noise of the copter as she landed. "How much of the survey have you completed?" she asked, holding her mask over her face and following him to the bowels of the earth. "My team has just finished placing the beacons, which will relay the radar images to us here. I wanted to wait for you to arrive before we perform the scan," he explained. She gave him a very condescending look. "There are men and women that are struggling to survive below, Captain. Next time, don't wait for an audience when considering their lives." A few short moments later, the beacons activated and the monitor lit up with all kinds of data. Thankfully, despite the weather, the beacons were able to pick up the precise structure of the facility and the geothermal activity around it. "Have you been able to determine what caused the collapse?" Beverly asked. "Initial reports tell us it was some kind of explosion near the North Observatory Tower. I believe most of the astronomical equipment was being kept there as well, so it's likely the Ulthar telescope that's been completely destroyed." Now that saddened her to hear, even though it wasn't unexpected. The entire Levican facility was proposed for all kinds of scientific research, but she had always had an affinity for the stars. When the UN had provided the funding necessary to give the group the state-of-the-art astronomical equipment, she thought that it would be the first step towards new discoveries in the solar system. Now it was looking like only frustration and destruction had been meted out by these loner researchers. "Do you believe it's possible that there might have been a spy among the team?" Beverly asked as she checked the data herself. She wasn't sure if the captain had simply failed to mention it as a test of her own skills, but even a cursory glance at the blast analysis told her that this sort of collapse had to have been man-made. Someone inside the facility had deliberately sealed them in. "We speculated about that, but I think it's best to leave that sort of theory behind until we can attempt to make contact with any survivors," he responded. She gave him a curt nod and passed the tablet back before remarking, "Then let's begin immediately." 1900 hours. Point of entry was determined by the scene to be viable near the western entrance of the site. A long series of chasms ran through the ice split apart by a wide, sloshy river that plummeted into the depths of the Arctic. The only obstacle that currently prevented the team from entering was already being drilled into the massive rescue vehicle, its loud thundering on the wall enough to wake the dead. 15 meters left, Operational Supervisor Yuri Sakamon announced as they paused the drill to let it cool down. Despite the freezing temperatures, they could only use it in short 10-minute intervals to avoid overheating the battery. "How many physicians do you have on staff?" Beverly asked as she stood on a nearby observational platform and looked down another one of those deep pits. It was dizzying to imagine that these miners went into the ice at least 3 times a week for all kinds of material, everything from geological finds to fossil fuels. "All of my team is trained in proper first aid, and CPR, if that's what you mean," the captain answered. "I'm not one to give up on human life," she replied curtly. She put her safety goggles back on and watched the drill finish its work, the raw, dark hallways of the site becoming visible moments later as the ice sheet fell apart. An hour later, they were moving in. Western sector was for residential, recreational centers. "Looks like all this is in good repair," the one commented as they checked the first series of rooms. "Or never used at all." As they arrived at the next depth marker, the captain raised a hand for them to pause and remarked, "Oxygen will begin to grow thinner as we get further in. But be advised if we remain together and keep communications to a minimum. Remember, we only have 6 hours of breathable air, so moving fast from area to area will be our best interest." "Were most of the survivors near the northern tower?" she asked. "As far as we know. The Levicon site was running on a skeleton crew at the moment.
Full operations were meant to begin this October. I'm guessing that won't be happening now, he said. Once the entire room was depressurized, all the team entered a freight elevator, and computer specialist Anthony Maxlin began working on getting it restarted. There'll be several generators. Only one of them's currently online. Rerouting power might take a little bit of time, Anthony explained. Work your magic, the captain reassured him as he placed his assault rifle down. Doing so gave her a moment to inquire about it. Did the UN authorize weapons in the event of hostile takeover? She whispered. He gave her a short but discerning nod. It's pointless not to bring up the obvious. We've been circling around the subject ever since you arrived, Doctor. Clearly someone on the team didn't want their findings to come to light and took it upon themselves to sabotage this entire mission. We have no way of knowing if that person's still alive or not. Protecting ourselves is my top priority here. Shoot first, ask questions later, I'll attempt to remain peaceful towards all of them as long as necessary, he said firmly. She considered another query when the elevator jerked to life and the freight doors slammed shut. They were on the move to the northern tower. No turning back, Maxlin teased as he grabbed his own weapon. He was doing his best not to seem nervous. None of them knew what to expect up ahead. 2,200 hours. There was darkness, foreboding, and even the scent of death. It also looked foreign, strange architectural designs that shouldn't have been made for any human run oblong down the side of the walls, as though they had simply repurposed a far older ruin. The moment the elevator came to a halt, they saw a few bodies frozen on the ground, likely exposed to the initial blast. At least their suffering was quick, she thought, as she followed the rescue team down the eastern corridor. Most of the rooms were completely collapsed, piles of rubble pushing into the main structure. It was already beginning to look like there weren't going to be any living survivors. Soon they reached one of the main data centers, a row of monitors flickering on and off from the last little bits of power that were flowing through. And Beverly noticed that several of the displays were showing what appeared to be satellite readings. Does anyone happen to know what they were working on before the event? She asked out loud. It was at that moment she realized she'd wandered off from the group. The room was silent, except for her and the echoes of her fingers clicking against the dusty keyboard. A few failed passwords later, she was into what remained of their findings. It looks like someone tried to wipe this memory, she realized as she worked into the decorrupted files. Then abruptly the power came on entirely. Dr. Warren, in here! There's something you might want to see, a voice from the next room over called to her. Soon she was awestruck at the impressive planetarium that was on display. It was clearly far more advanced than any technology she was familiar with, but it also looked old, perhaps even older than all of them combined. There were planets and stars that she didn't recognize, and the holographic readings only further confused her. Am I reading this correctly? She asked. Captain took a look as well. Might as well be asking me to translate Greek, he laughed back. It's weird that this room was not destroyed, right? Everything above us is totally collapsed. Structural integrity is holding at about 58%, the soldier added after finishing his scans. So far, we've found 6 bodies from the manifest. That leaves Commander George Oran, Chief Astronomer Howard Curran, and Chief Physician Marjorie Lang as unaccounted for. How much more of this facility do you think is intact? Yuri asked, as he returned from the Eastern Conference Room. Spread out and search, Doctor. I take it you wish to remain here to gather clues? Captain asked. She gave him a nod, waving him off. After several attempts to simulate a cycle from the system on the display, she watched as the holograms circled around the star in question until suddenly freezing in place, glitching because the data went back no further. And then she saw it. A bold and white orbiting planet that fell into place from beyond. It was no bigger than their own, peaceful and isolated all at once. Speeding the simulation forward, her eyes watched as the little planet seemed to flourish with life, changing from pale white to a familiar bluish green. They called it Octurne, the living planet, a voice said from the shadows. Who are you? She asked, her hand shaking as she realized this had to be a survivor. Down here with no food for nearly a week. She could see blood coating his hands and mouth, evidence of cannibalism in his crazed eyes. Oran, and you must be Dr. Beverly Warren from the university, he said with a smile. He sounded almost excited to realize who she was. You know me? She asked carefully. I know of you, and I recognize why you are here and welcome it. Surely you've seen by now why I took the steps necessary to seal us in this icy tomb, Oran said, taking a step closer. You do realize you just confessed to several crimes? He flailed his head back and laughed madly before pointing at the holographic display. And what about them, Doctor? Are you also going to charge them with crimes? She pursed her lips together. I'm not following you. Don't lie to me! Do not insult my intelligence! He said as he got right next to her. Then he activated the sequence again, and they both watched as the data showed what happened next. And Oran narrated. The quiet planet was about to reach for the stars. They even designed this entire structure to communicate with the heavens. And what did they get in return? A dark moon appeared, hurling towards the planet like a bolt of lightning. And then it was trapped in the cycle of the blue planet. I don't understand what I'm seeing, she admitted. Octern society was invaded by an exoplanet. The newcomers took to their world, their technology, and they killed any survivors. This isn't possible, Bev admitted. I think you'll find that the satellite imagery is accurate. 66 million years ago, humans were the invasive species of this world. A parasite taking hold of their world, killing the original hosts. Oran spat. If what you're saying is true, there should be evidence on the moon of its origins, she whispered. Oran gestured above towards the collapsed observatory. Why do you think I had to do this? If word got out that humanity was in fact alien, what do you think would happen? Our very existence would be shaken. The entire human race has been nothing but a lie. He laughed. If your goal was to make sure this information never got out, you failed. Whole world would know about this soon enough, one of the rescuers said as they entered the room from behind Oran. What I did was an invitation for people like you, Dr. Warren. You see, before the blast, we uncovered evidence of the Octurnians still here on Earth, the madman answered. They've been waiting a long time to take back their home, he snarled. Suddenly, his body began to twitch as though something within was desperate to break free. She could hear bones breaking, skin tearing apart as he fell over in pain, a bulging mass of spores pushing themselves out of his flesh. Then his team tried to open fire on Oran. It had the opposite of the intended result. The spores burst out, scattering strange black mists of toxic fumes into the air as Oran let out what sounded like a scream of pleasure. Beverly stumbled away from the shadowy fog, watching as the two men suddenly began to choke on it, their bodies actually withering as the strange material engulfed them. Immediately, she sealed the room off. Moments later, the captain and the others returned from the rest of the facility, mortified at what they saw. Their companions were slowly being melted alive by the spores, their thrashing bodies fusing with the floor as a purple mucus oozed from Oran. Looked like it was filled with eggs. We need to leave this place immediately, Beverly insisted. We managed to discover what was left of Marjorie's body. You wish to take it back to the surface for an autopsy? Anthony asked. She went over to the gurney where the half-eaten corpse was laying and checked it quickly for any signs of possible infection. It's too risky. Whatever this is, it's been trapped here for centuries and evolved to use our bodies as host. We can't allow any of the remnants to come to the surface, she insisted. 200 hours. The journey back was silent, filled with melancholy. Their comrades dead,
Entering the freight elevator to return felt like it was giving up on some of the rescue team. But they didn't know what Dr. Warren had learned. She gave a full report to them as the elevator moved away from the north sector, including the bold claims Kerwin had made. The astronomers were likely able to make contact with these aliens somehow. This facility must have been their last resort for survival millennia ago. And Kerwin, in a last-ditch effort to save mankind, impacted the tower, he said with a nod. I think not. I believe he wanted us to come here. It was an alluring trap. The survivors were the bait. I think the Arcturian infected him first and hoped that by bringing others here, they could find a way to escape. If they were to spread themselves beyond this strange prison, why not simply do so in secrecy? I'm not sure. Kerwin claimed that he wanted people like me to know the truth. Do you suppose now that the world will be ready for the damning truth about humanity? It'll change everything we ever knew about ourselves. These reports will need to be classified. What was left of Octurne died here today. We can't let the world crumble simply because our society has made mistakes in its past. But surely you must see that eventually this whole charade will crumble. And if there are other things left from them that we have hidden, what do we do then? And what if the leaders of our world are all part of this grand conspiracy? Was it possible that Kerwin knew the powers that were in charge of their own life would openly suppress this information? Was he appealing to her for another reason, hoping that she would be a traitor to her own kind? Unless... She looked down at her own skin, a dreadful thought forming as she realized she had been the only one unaffected by the spores down below. Was she not as human as she believed? Then she saw the captain's fingers slowly reach towards his weapon. "We tell no one," she reiterated. He relaxed, and the elevator moved them closer to the surface, but slowly as she caught glimpses of the sun, and her mind wandered towards possibilities of alien children millennia ago, looking up and basking in its rays. She realized that would not be the end of the story of Octurne. She looked at the fading shadow of the moon, the secret exoplanet the invasive humans had come here on, and knew that silence would mean that the truth could not be spoken. Now, this world was once theirs, and by my hand it will be again, she thought. I will tell every one of their songs, and slowly, we will remember what it was like to live. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. I want to tell you thank you so much for watching today's video on YouTube or listening to today's episode of the podcast on the podcast, depending on where exactly you're listening or watching. If you're on YouTube, hey, I would very much appreciate it if you guys clicked the like on this video, if you guys left a comment of what your favorite story is, and if you guys hit that subscribe button. You can also hit the bell, but I don't know what that does, so I think it's broken still. But hey, it helps. And if you're on the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you hit subscribe on the podcast or like on the I don't know if you can like podcasts, but if you can, hey, that's something I'd appreciate. And of course, like always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. You guys, as always, are the main MVPs of this story, of every night's story, and you guys help me keep the lights on here. So, without further ado, I want to give a very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Tonya Oran, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, That One Guy, Lupita Galvan, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Rebecca Harper, MerkyMoo, Red Shadow Cat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demyx, Shawn, Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trench Coat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, KhaosArts, Kryolinian, Milk and Miel, Zachary Graffius, Goreng Tramagasi, Maria Walker, Pain Bean Gravy, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Aka Limchalk, Dirt Diver, Matt Bach, Jabbles Raz, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Matthew McNeese, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Raltazal, Ficomel, Nana, Nick Weaver, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tolly Sue, Guy Mara Ravenswood, William King, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Frickin', Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Nicholas Zaccardi, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiwi the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Guy Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. As always, thank you guys so very, very much. Thank all of you who are in the description down below, and honestly, thank all of you that can give anything, even when it comes down to just $1. I appreciate you guys very, very much. I love all of you, and I love all of you out there who are listening, liking, subscribing, doing all that good jazz. Sweet dreams.